Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today is a very special program. I'm going to do something I've never done before. This particular open-ended conversation with Bernardo Kastrup may last as long as 3 hours. Bernardo arguably is one of the most important contemporary thinkers. He is the author of about a dozen books arguing for the mental nature of reality, something known as philosophical idealism. His books include Why Materialism is Baloney, More Than Allegory, Dreamed Up Reality, Decoding Schopenhauer's Metaphysics, Meaning in Absurdity, Decoding Jung's Metaphysics, Rationalist Spirituality, The Idea of the World, a multidisciplinary argument for the mental nature of reality, and most recently, Science Ideated, the Fall of Matter and the Contours of the Next Mainstream Scientific Worldview. Bernardo lives in the Netherlands, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Bernardo. Once again, a great pleasure to be with you.
Looking forward to this one more than the previous ones, Jeff.
Well, this is going to be a very unusual event. Neither of us, to my knowledge, has a planned agenda, and yet we've both been engaged in our work now for decades, and you in particular can look back and say you've authored a dozen books to try and promote the idea of metaphysical idealism. Why is it so important to you?
Oh, I wish I had a clear, explicit answer to that. It feels important. It feels like something I must do, and I have to do. And because I don't know quite why, I use this metaphor of the daimon, like Socrates had a daimon that told him what not to do. So I have a daimon that tells me what I must do. But over the years, I've come to just accept that that's how it is. That's how nature wants to move through this thing here, Bernardo Kastrup. And who am I to oppose it? So, yeah, just do it. I don't have a particular goal in mind, Jeff, like, well, by 2030, idealism should be mainstream. I mean, you do that in companies, but in my case, I try to be very disciplined about not taking responsibility for the end result, but only for my contribution. And beyond that, it's not up to me, but I feel in my body that I must do that. And if I resist it, the crap hits the fan, all kinds of symptoms, psychological, physical, it's a disaster.
So there's some inner force propelling you forward. One of my mentors, Gene Houston, used to use the Greek word, I'm sure you're familiar with, entelechy. Yeah. But does that sound familiar to you? Because you come across to me as somebody who is in the clutches of a daimon as well. Well, in my case, it sort of focuses on the idea of parapsychology and consciousness. And, when I look back at my past, I had a very normal childhood. My father ran a furniture store in a small Midwestern city in the United States. I envisioned that I would grow up and run a furniture store. And it wasn't until, I think, around the time I started using marijuana and LSD as an undergraduate in college, that I even began to think in philosophical terms in a deep way, and began to, in some small, slight way, consider the possibilities that you and I are now discussing.
But now that you're doing that, do you feel that you must do it, or you just do it because you enjoy it?
I love it. I totally love it.
Is that why you do it?
Well, that's a good question, because there's a certain sacrifice involved, pursuing a career as I have in parapsychology, especially an academic career, getting a PhD in a field for which there were no jobs, was pretty risky. Frankly, and not only that, I shouldn't have been, but I was quite surprised at the amount of hostility directed towards me for pursuing a career in parapsychology before I even graduated. The official skeptical groups were already trying to undermine my doctoral program at the university, and were working to try to get the university to refuse to grant me a degree.
The amount of insecurity out there is just astonishing, because what can motivate such a, partisan or a fundamentalist approach than a lot of insecurity? I didn't, so far at least, I didn't have to put up with it. I think I got pretty lucky that a lot of people disagree with me, but they don't call me nuts. There is a minimum level of respect, except from one character that I don't take seriously in that sense anyway. But I don't always love it, especially in today's crazy world. To have to be there in the center of the storm of social media and all that hysteria. There are days I go like, oh man, all I wanted now was to live in my dreamed hut on the Swiss Alps, off the grid, and milk my goat in the morning, and walk through the forest. There are days I'm like, why am I doing this? But it's not an option. It feels so clear to me that it is not an option. It's not possible. It's not up to me. And if I try it, the body reacts. The body tells you, no. This is not the way you ought to do it. So it's what it is. So that's why I do it. I don't really have an option. People ask me all the time about free will, and I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I wish.
Well, let's do a thought experiment. If you had free will, what would you do differently?
No, I don't mean that everything is determined. I don't mean that. I think we have some degree of egoic free will. It's like you can choose your mortgage package, you can choose the best way to work in the morning, but you don't choose your thoughts, you don't choose your emotions. You just don't. But if I had free will, what I would be doing today, right now? Oh, I wouldn't be in the internet hysteria, in the culture wars. No, I wouldn't be there. Now, there is one thing that I still sort of managed to carve out from my Daimon, the freedom to do on my spare time. And that's, designing and building little computers and restoring old computers. That I would still do. And other than that, I would like to live not in the middle of one of the most urban areas in the world, which is where I live now. If you look at the map of the Earth at night, look for the spot that is the brightest, most concentrated urbanization. I'm bang in the middle of that, between Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Germany. I wouldn't be doing this. No, I would already be living, I don't know, on the little hills around the Mosel River in the west of Germany. Where life goes slower, the main economic activity is winemaking. People take it easy. There isn't so much hysteria. That's what I would be doing, I think.
But you could live there now and still pursue your interests.
I go there as often as I can. There's another part also in West Germany, the valley of the river Ahr, which is closer to me. It's like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and I was deprived from that one last year because it was destroyed by the floods, the rains that happened last year. So I'm waiting for. And the German people they are very hardy people. They have been through a lot, so they are not going to bow down to this one. And soon enough, it will all be reconstructed, and I will go back there. So I could be doing this kind of thing from there, but yeah, could I really? Internet connection is not reliable. Now I have 200 megabits per second uplink to you.
Oh, that's great.
I don't know, 10 HD movies at once without a glitch to you. Have fiber optics going to the back of my computer. And very close to an international airport, 10 minutes from me. Highway system, perfect. In an hour, I can be 150 kilometers away. Not anymore. They changed the speed limit now, but almost 150 kilometers away. No, over 100 miles away I can be. So it's handy. And if I'm invited, for instance, by Dutch media, which is happening a lot now, in the Netherlands, there is one little town where the media is concentrated. It's close to Utrecht. It's called Hilversum. And I can be in Hilversum in 50 minutes. So if I'm asked today, can you come over to the studio to comment on this or that? I just hop into the car and I'm there. But if I'm on the Mosel, it's 3.5 hours. It doesn't happen like that.
So are you becoming a media personality?
In the Netherlands, I'm sort of going mainstream now. It's peculiar. It took over a decade, but the Dutch people sort of discovered me now. It was strange to talk about these things in Dutch in the beginning because you get so much into the English language literature, which is the entire literature, that your brain sort of reshuffles for you to think in English. But now I got used to it already. It started in 2020, that when I appeared in a primetime Dutch television documentary on Sunday evening. Really, it doesn't get more primetime than that. And then now the rest of the media wants to talk to me or consult or discuss shows that they are planning. It's cool. It's cool. If you ask me, do I enjoy it? No. But I don't dislike it either.
Well, it involves, I guess, having the mindset of a debater.
That I have, Jeff. And that I think is a difference between you and me. Your skill is to draw things out of people. And you are brilliant at doing that. I have none of that skill. It's really not how I'm put together. I envy that sometimes when I see you do that. My mindset is intellectual gladiator archetype, something along those lines. I enjoy it, but I have to be careful because I don't want to come across as a jerk, if you know what I mean, and I don't want also to scare people off debating me. And it already happened. There are people who say in public, "I'm not going to debate Bernardo because he is not polite," And I understand that, but the archetype is strong in me, and it's a struggle to balance it out. I throw the I Ching on the first hours of the 1st of January every year, and this year I don't remember what number it was precisely, but the message was, take it easy. Take it easy. Don't go all the way. You don't need to draw blood. And it may backfire. So so I'm trying to do that.
Yeah, I understand. Sometimes a message like that could trigger the opposite response.
Yeah, there are people who will not debate me because of that. I worked in the industry, in the corporate world, for 25 years, and it changes you. You grow a crocodile skin, and because people they're not polite in the corporate world. Things are very practical, And if they think you are doing nonsense or saying nonsense, they come down on you pretty strong. And you get trained to do the same. My greatest mentor in my entire profession, well, my father figure was my first boss, a physicist called Rudolf Bock at CERN. He died already several years ago. He was my first mentor and a kind of father figure for me. But the mentor that most influenced me is ASML's ASML Lithography. That's a Dutch company that sells chip making equipment to all other companies. It's not only market leader, it sort of owns the market. Without ASML, no new iPhones for some 10 years. If ASML disappeared today, I worked there for 15 years. And the CTO of ASML influenced me a lot. I still have great respect and admiration for him. And he had this no bullshit, no nonsense mentality. He would come down hard on you. So I sort of grew up, between quotes, considering that not only normal, but appropriate. And it's a constant policing for me to not be quite like that in philosophy. People think I'm hard and unpolite. They have no idea what I would be if I didn't police myself. You'd be shocked.
Having your career begin in a technological environment almost certainly means that you incorporated their worldview of materialism. You must have at one time been a hardcore materialist.
Not really hardcore, no. Because it's the moment I started thinking about metaphysics, materialism or what else, it doesn't take long for you to realize that it doesn't add up. Things don't quite work. I was a materialist when I was not thinking about it, when I didn't care. I landed at CERN 2 days after I graduated. It was my dream job. It's what I wanted to do when I was 7. And then I was 22, and there I landed. 22. So it was like a dream come true, and I was busy with everything except metaphysics. But you breathe materialism at CERN, because what do we study? We study matter. That's what particle physics is. That's what high energy physics is. Even you can call it nuclear physics. I think it's an outdated name, but CERN means the European Center for Nuclear Research. So I breathed it in the air, but I was not a hardcore materialist willing to defend materialism. It's just like, well, yeah, everybody is materialist, right? So I am too, but I was not going to defend it.
And most materialists, I think, who even the ones who think of themselves as hardcore are pretty much in that camp.
I think you're correct. I think what materialism has going for it is that people who think they are materialists, one, don't know what materialism is. So that's ignorance. That's the first thing materialism has going for it. And two, its very failures work in its favor. Let me tell you why. Materialism fails to explain experience. How does brain activity generate experience? There is no answer for that. Now, that's a great advantage, because whatever brain activity you measure or don't measure, materialism is compatible with it, because it doesn't specify how the brain exactly does it. So whatever the brain does it's compatible with materialism. See what I mean? So it's ignorance and explanatory failure are the two things that materialism has going for it, which is amazing. It's a complete reversal of post-enlightenment epistemic values. It's ridiculous.
My dissertation advisor when I was a graduate student at Berkeley was a pragmatic philosopher, Michael Scriven. And I would question him about materialism, and he likened it to political imperialism. He thought of it in those terms rather than in philosophical terms, and he felt that whatever alternative anyone might come up with, or whatever empirical data might contradict the standard views of materialism, it would modify itself in order to absorb it. He didn't think that materialism would ever die.
I think he was correct. And I'm tempted to tell something that I shouldn't. I will tell it in an anonymous way. So the person in question will not be named, but scientists and philosophers have background discussions. It's not like we don't talk with each other when we do. And there is a sort of tacit understanding that certain things, when they are discussed by email or on WhatsApp, that those are not on the public arena. And I was having a discussion with a scientist not that long ago, and we both had the understanding, which is hard to avoid in quantum physics today, that physical entities don't have standalone existence. They don't have their own existence. So how can we? All physical properties arise from measurement. They are not there before measurement. But of course, something is there before measurement. Something is measured. Even if it has nothing to do with physical properties, there is something that is being measured. And the result of that is physical properties. So what is that something? And this scientist said, well, we just need some form of structure to attach physical properties upon measurement. And I said, I think you're right. That's what we need. We need some, we are talking science, not philosophy. We need some kind of structural description, some kind of scaffolding, some kind of framework to which we can attach material properties. And of course, that scaffolding is then by definition not physical, because what's physical is the properties. And then this person said, well, no, why can't we call that physical? We just call that physical. So it was not malicious. It was just the normal way of thinking of this person. What's happening here is the following. When we understand beyond any shadow of a doubt that reality as it is in itself is not physical, that it is something else, it has nothing to do with the stuff we call physical, with the properties we call physical, like mass, charge, momentum, spin, we will go around and say, well, but that's physical too. We will redefine the word physical so that physicalism will be true by linguistic definition. Wait for it. It's coming. It will happen. And I will have a laugh beyond measure. When we find out it's all mind, we'll say, no, mind is physical too. This has happened before. There was a time, a couple of 100 years ago, when the notion of fields was magical. Gravitational fields, electric fields. So people thought that there had to be some kind of glue, invisible glue, that would attract shaft to amber rods, electrostatic attraction. But of course, fields don't exist. It's magical nonsense. It's not material. There has to be some material, some form of elastic invisible glue. They called it effluvium, because we just wouldn't accommodate the notion of an invisible field within the notion of matter or something that is physical. But it did happen. Maxwell came along, Maxwell's field equations, and now fields, invisible stuff that vibrates in a vacuum. What the hell is vibrating in a vacuum? What is there to vibrate? It's a vacuum. But no, that's physical, all right? Fields are physical. Space-time is physical. What is space-time? It's the very definition of nothing. Pure space-time is nothing. It's where things are put. It's not a thing, but it's physical. It's modeled as bending and twisting. So wait and see. There will come a point where cognition will be physical. Some people are already trying to do that. It's called identity theory.
Can you explain that a little more?
Identity theory is a notion. There are three absurd lines of discourse in philosophy of mind today. Two of them you're very familiar with, I'm sure. One is illusionism, that consciousness doesn't exist. It's an illusion. Well, never mind the fact that an illusion is an experience. It's something in consciousness. So you're achieving nothing by saying that. The other one is eliminativism, that it's not that consciousness is an illusion. It's that certain types of experience that we think we have, we actually don't. It's not an illusion. We just don't have those experiences. That's the Pat Churchland thing. And the third one is identity theory, which is that the distinction between neurophysiology and consciousness is a faulty one. We are talking about one and the same thing. I mean, these are linguistics and twists of mind to accommodate hopeless intuitions that are on the edge of pathology. It's very close to madness.
I seem to recall you at one time suggesting that the brain is the external appearance of our inner experience. That's a kind of identity theory, isn't it?
No. Look, the image of a phenomenon is not the phenomenon. It's something that is projected by the phenomenon. So the image is reducible to the phenomenon, but there can be a phenomenon without the image. For instance, flames are the image of combustion, but there can be combustion without flames. It's happening all the time. Ethanol combusts without visible flames. It doesn't project an image, but it still happens. If it's happening on your skin, you feel it. It will burn you. So it's not... Identity theory is not the statement that one is reducible to the other. It's the statement that one is the other. That there is no distinction, that there is no case in which you need one of the words and cannot use the other. You see what I mean?
Well, actually, I'm struggling with it. I'm not sure I quite see it yet. But let me jump around a little bit, if I may, because you were talking about effluvium earlier, and it reminded me of a subsequent debate when, after Maxwell's electromagnetic theory occurred, people thought, well, we have to have ether. You can't have something waving unless there's a material, a substance that it is waving through, and space-time didn't seem to be sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, what is our intuition of waves? What are the visible waves that everybody always sees? That's waves on water. But there is nothing to the wave but the water moving. You can't lift the wave out of the water. The wave is just a pattern of behavior of the water. Same with sound. Sound is air vibrations, waves in air. There is nothing to sound but air moving. You can't take the sound out of the air, if you know what I mean. The only thing that exists is air. The only thing that exists is water. But electromagnetic waves go through vacuum. So what is then waving? If you think about it, what the hell is waving through a vacuum? We know it goes through. What is waving? So the ether came. You know what the modern answer is? The modern answer is that, okay, there is no ether. It is really a vacuum. But the vacuum is alive in the sense that force-carrying particles pop into existence out of nothing and then disappear into nothingness again. And that's what carries the signal through the vacuum. So did you really solve it? You didn't quite solve it, did you? Particles popping into existence spontaneously and then proceeding to disappear into nothingness again? How do you wrap your head around that? So we have been dealing with magic for a long time. It has been an integral part of science. It's just that it goes by technical names.
I mean, Newton himself realized that gravity seemed to be mysterious action at a distance.
Took the French 50 years to stop laughing of Newton, right? Like, what? An invisible force acting at a distance instantaneously? What nonsense. And today, again, we think it's nonsense. Because today, there are no such invisible forces. We know that, right? Today, we know that it's the invisible fabric of space-time that bends and twists. It's one magic for another. Stuff is magical. Magic has always been a part of science. If you can predict the behavior of the magic happening, that's science.
It's a good way to put it. Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, I was listening to the conversation you had with the physicist Tom Campbell. Both of you are metaphysical idealists, and the way he couched it is that you each have different metaphors that you use to explain reality. And his metaphor was the idea of a computer simulation, and he attributed to you the metaphor of the dashboard, that is, our mental pictures of the world are like a dashboard on an airplane.
Yeah, I think we are very naive in thinking that perception, our perception, the colors we see, the smells we feel, that's akin to a kind of transparent window into the world, that we see the world as it is in itself. It's a very naive picture, but it's a vastly dominating picture. Most people, most scientists, most philosophers, vast majority, 90+%, that's how they implicitly think of perception. That perception is a kind of transparent glass window that allows us to apprehend the world as it is in itself. But it's nonsensical. The five senses are sensors, just like the sensors of an aircraft. There's a sensor pitot tube to measure airspeed. There is a radar emitter, a sensor to project air pressure ahead of the, not project, to measure air pressure ahead of the plane. There is a sensor for the plane's attitude, what is the angle in which the plane is. And then that feeds into dials on a dashboard inside, where you can see the result of those measurements performed by the sensors. We are like the airplane. We have sensors, two eyes, a nose is a sensor, the tongue is a sensor, the ears are a sensor, the surface of the skin is a sensor, and that conveys information to an internal dashboard, which we call perception. So perception is a dashboard of dials. It gives us accurate information about the world, just like the airplane's dashboard. And a pilot can fly by instrument without seeing anything. Today, a pilot does not need a windshield. Safety rules oblige that pilot must still have a windshield, but it's not strictly required anymore in practice. So we are pilots flying by instruments. And we have this naivety. Imagine that you are a pilot who was born inside an airplane cockpit and you've never seen the world. There is no window. There is only the dashboard. And the dashboard is accurate enough that you can navigate through life. You can go where you need, can do the stuff that you need to do through the dashboard. We would think that the dashboard is the world. Our language would evolve to talk about the world in terms of the dials, the dimensions, the scales of the dashboard. And then we would forget that, hey, wait a moment, the dashboard is a representation of the world. It is accurate in the sense that it conveys accurate information about the world, but the world doesn't look like the dashboard. The world is something completely different, completely else. And that's what's happening right now. We are that pilot that was born inside an airplane cockpit without a window and has been relying on the dashboard throughout life. But we are naive. We think the dashboard is the world. Sorry, buddy, that doesn't work. It doesn't work because of thermodynamics considerations. We wouldn't be able to cap the dispersion of our internal states if we had a transparent window into the world. It doesn't work in evolutionary terms. There is no way evolution would have favored truth. Evolution favors survival and accuracy, not a representation that looks the same as the world. That's nonsensical. Imagine, and that's Donald Hoffman. Imagine a computer operating system that instead of giving you a desktop metaphor, would present the files to you as chains of zeros and ones or open and closed microscopic switches on the chips. You would go nuts. You would not be able to do anything with that operating system. The computer would be useless. The same when it comes to us. But we insist, and most physicists think, that the world as displayed on the screen of perception is, at least in form, in geometrical relationships, is identical to the world as it is in itself. That is, sorry, no, that cannot possibly be the case. And that changes everything.
You've described it as extremely seductive.
What?
This dashboard, to think that it is reality, that we get seduced by it. And I imagine when you talked about your love of repairing computers, when you're doing that, I imagine that you assume the same, that your work repairing the computers is very real.
It is inevitable, isn't it? Because even our language evolved to talk about things in terms of the dashboard dimensions and scales and dial conventions. It is. We have never seen in our lives, we have never seen the world as it is in itself. We've never apprehended the world as it is in itself. We were born in the cockpit. So, of course, I mean, I'm not against using cockpit as a language or dashboard as a language, as opposed to real as a language. We speak dashboard, we don't speak real, if you know what I mean. And that's okay. That's the way to survive and to have a meaningful life. I think, and you're correct. When I'm fixing old computers or building new ones, I don't go into the internal dialogue of, well, this computer is just actually some representations on my dials. The real thing out there I have no direct access to. I don't do that. I'm too busy having fun. But I think it's important that when we stop to think about things, that we remember that this is what is actually going on. Otherwise, we extract all the wrong conclusions. For instance, if we think that what is on the dashboard is the world as it is in itself, then the world is physical. And that changes everything if the world is not physical. Because if you understand that when you see another person, the body of another person, you understand that that's a dashboard representation of the person's inner life. If you remember that the body is not what generates the inner life of a person, but it is a representation of the inner life of the person on a dashboard. If you remember that, then if the body dissolves and decomposes, then something has changed in the inner life of the person. Not necessarily it's gone, it's over. So there are all kinds of implications of remembering that our condition is that of somebody born in a cockpit who has never peeked through the window. Don't you think that?
Well, when I was an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin, I took a course on the religious traditions and philosophies of India. And one of the first concepts that was introduced is the idea of Maya, which I subsequently had many, many discussions, and everybody seems to have a different definition of Maya. But the way it was first taught to me, it was very straightforward, and it was just what you're saying, that what we consider to be the external world in which we live and die and move about is an illusion. It is not real.
Yeah, I mean, I resist the word illusion, because would you use this word for an airplane dashboard? The dashboard is an illusion. We wouldn't say that. You would say, well, it's real as a dashboard.
Yeah.
And it's useful as such. It's just that it's not the whole story. We're not confusing it with the world, but it's real as a dashboard. So if you ask me, is the physical world real? I would say it's real as a dashboard representation of what is actually out there. It's useful. We should not neglect it, because otherwise, if you neglect the instruments, you crash the plane. It's not a good picture. So I tend to resist words like illusion and simulation. And, is a dashboard a simulation? It's a very pragmatic thing. We need to make sensor readings of the world out there so we can navigate it, and those readings have to be presented to us in some way.
Well, of course, my word illusion that I just used is sort of a way of interpreting in English what the ancient rishis were trying to describe by the word Maya, which Maya is also a goddess. And what I really want to get at here is, what do you think of these ancient meditators who seem to almost universally in every culture come up with an idealist philosophy not so different from your own?
Oh, it's not surprising at all. I mean, I like to say it, I probably have said this to you already more than once. The truth is not fragile. Even if we can't recognize it, it's all around us. We are in the middle of it. We are part of it. It's flowing through the insides of us and the outside of us, because whatever the truth is, it is what is. It's what's happening right now. So it's not surprising that people, bump their noses against it every now and then and go, oh my God, this is actually what's going on. I'm not surprised at all about it. But the thing, and this is my own characteristic, my own, peculiarity. I resist framing these insights in a way that makes us go, whoa, wow, this is deep, this is profound. No, it's not. It's just on your face. It's very pragmatic, normal, trivial. Know what I mean? So when people say, oh, Maya, it's a great illusion, whoa, profound. No. It's just the darn dashboard. It's how things work. But that's my peculiarity.
Yeah, because it seems to me that there are people out there who will fight tooth and nail against you. And I'll give you an example of a famous person you probably know of, Steven Pinker. I think of him as a friend. I think of him as a wise person in many regards. I like his writing. He's recently come out and said, we have to learn to debate these issues. At the same time, he said there's no point in debating the issue of ESP or psychic phenomenon because that's impossible. It couldn't exist at all, and therefore we don't even need to look at the evidence. And when he was challenged by my friend Rupert Sheldrake, another idealist, to debate this matter, I believe he said, well, I just don't have the bandwidth to go into it. At the same time, he's calling for open debates on deep issues. So it strikes me that when you see a wise man like Steven Pinker really dug in to defending a point of view that has to exclude the empirical evidence of parapsychology, which from my point of view, from an empiricist point of view, the most direct challenge to materialism, he sort of shrinks away from it.
We are all humans, right? And humans are full of it. Let's be frank. We are monkeys, and we've been thinking conceptually for about 30,000 years, which was not even yesterday. It was like last second. We've just been born. We are still, we can't even walk yet. So I feel sympathy at the same time that I feel combative when I hear this kind of thing. I mean, I have heard recently, debates where some very famous big podcasters have attempted to organize certain debates between me and other people. And some of those happened and others didn't. People who were happy to discuss in private with me will not have a public debate. And other people who are happy to criticize me will not have a debate with me. And of course, the answer is always, I don't have the bandwidth. I'm too busy. Of course. Yeah, sure. So I think it's a pity. Normally, I try to make it more expensive for people to not debate me. Like, you will not. If you don't want, you will not. But I will make it expensive for you to say no. Like, there were things I wanted to discuss with Sabine Hossenfelder, which is a physicist I like. I actually like the woman. But I think she betrays her own values when it comes to certain blind spots, which is exactly what you're describing about Steven Pinker. So I wanted to bring it up in a debate, but she wouldn't debate. I had to write an essay recently and say, okay, this is what I think. And she probably got upset because it makes her position look like exactly the type of position that she criticizes. Namely, she's on a crusade against fantasy in physics. She thinks we should be, keep our eyes on the proverbial empirical ball at all times and not go down avenues of fantasizing based on beauty and mathematical symmetry. Now, I sympathize with that because in my young years, at the time when I started working at CERN, there was this thing growing in physics. It was early days called supersymmetry, an extraordinarily beautiful theory. It's the kind of thing, it's like Euler's equation. You look at it, and if you understand what it's saying, you want to cry. Like Euler's equation, if I look at it and I think for 30 seconds what that means, I go like, no, my hair is already going up. My hair is already going like a porcupine. And it turned out it's not true. And So it doesn't matter how beautiful it was. It's not true. We didn't find Susie or supersymmetry with the LHC. So I sympathize a lot with her, this focus on empiricism and against fantasy. But then she goes around and proposes this hidden variables nonsense in order to preserve a physically realist, determinist picture of the world. Stuff for which there is a precisely zero empirical evidence. She doesn't even define what it is. She defines hidden variables in terms of what it has to do in order to safeguard physicalism. She doesn't even say what it is. Of course she doesn't, because it's magical stuff. It's fantasy, fantastical stuff. So how can somebody who is on a crusade against fantasy not realize the glaring blind spot that she turns around and then puts forward fantasy? Human psychology is amazing.
If you were to look at yourself for a moment, would you say there are areas in which you contradict yourself?
In life, of course.
Uh-huh.
In philosophy, I try to be very careful about not contradicting myself. And sometimes I appear to contradict myself, but then I make a disclaimer explaining that I'm using different reference points. But in life, I'm sure I contradict myself. Now, I can't report it to you because if I were metacognitively aware of my inner contradictions, I would have solved them, if you know what I mean.
Well, I just wonder if this world in which we're embedded is self-contradictory by its very nature, and therefore it's inescapable that humans do this.
You're thinking of Patrick Harpur's daimonic reality.
Well, I'm not familiar with that, but maybe I should look into it.
Oh, you should look into Patrick Harpur if you've never interviewed him. Harpur is Harpur. I think he's one of the most eloquent, profound, little-known thinkers in the world today. There was a time in which he was a little better known because he collaborated with Professor Mack on the whole idea of alien abductions and all that. But then he wrote a few brilliant books that didn't ignite for some reason. I don't know what's wrong with the world. How can Patrick Harpur not be known to everybody? But that's a name maybe you should consider. But he talks about reality as being essentially self-contradictory. I resist that because of my science background. I acknowledge that there are large swaths of reality that transcend Aristotelian logic, because logic is relatively arbitrary. We cannot use logic to substantiate logic. That's circular reasoning. So, and we know that from quantum physics, certain things seem to violate logic. We know that there are alternative logics than Aristotelian one. There is intuitionistic logic, for instance, that drops some of the assumptions of Aristotelian logic. So I acknowledge that Aristotelian logic cannot grasp and model the whole of reality. There is stuff that exceeds our monkey logic. Sure, I acknowledge that. But amongst this stuff that we think we did understand, I resist saying that it's all fundamentally plagued by contradiction. I mean, mathematics is, we know that since Kurt Gödel, that mathematics is plagued by inner contradictions, but that doesn't mean that it's entirely valueless. We can use the bits of it that survive, I think. So I resist that.
Earlier, you were pointing out the human race is essentially in its infancy still. I think, the oldest projections, the very oldest projections might say we've been around a million years, maybe let's say 6 million years. Even so, that's a tiny fraction of the life of this planet. So I agree. We're in our infancy, and we behave like infants, or at best adolescents, certainly on the political scale. And yet we're confronting our own self-destruction. We could possibly within 100 years create our own extinction as a species. That seems to be a contradiction.
Well, the genus Homo has been around for a few million years, but Homo sapiens has been around for 200,000. And Homo sapiens capable of language and rational thinking, about 30,000. So it's really, really worse than you it's more recent than you were portraying. So I don't think we can extinguish the species. There will always be the African Bushman, the Australian Aboriginal, the Northern Inuit who have the skills to survive without the safety net of a civilization. But I think we can destroy the civilization. We can't completely destroy our own way of life. We will not destroy the planet. Give it 1,000,000 years and it's all green and luxuriant again. And even Homo sapiens, I think there will be enough of us that have the skills that will survive in remote places, or not so remote. The African bushland is not remote at all. It's right in the middle. But you know what I mean. So I'm a little less concerned about extinguishing the species, but extinguishing the civilization, oh, we are on the cusp of it.
Well, that seems to be a major contradiction where on the one hand, if you watch the financial news, there's all sorts of new technologies coming online and a great future ahead of us into the metaverse or whatever. And at the other hand, if you watch the climate news, people are saying that the Earth could heat up to the point where it becomes uninhabitable for vertebrates.
Well, let's cross our fingers that isn't going to happen. I think nature is experimenting, and we are part of nature. We are part of the great experiment, and we tend to think of ourselves as somehow outside nature. The scientific method sort of stimulates this perspective because it's operationally useful, but it's only that. It's only operationally useful. It's not true. It's only something that helps you make experiments, but we are part of nature, and nature is experimenting, and it doesn't know the boundaries. It doesn't know the edges. So I think it's entirely conceivable that we may extinguish our way of life. Now, like all vertebrates, that's pretty bad if that happened, because then our species would go, and then it would take a long time to come back to metacognitive awareness. And maybe outside time, it doesn't matter, but from our perspective in time, that would be a real pity if that happened.
Well, there's another contradiction as well. The idea that consciousness is outside of time, but we in our physical bodies are inside of time.
Do you have your own way to wrap your head around this one? or I have a tentative way.
Okay.
Consciousness is never in time. If you think about it, you are never in time. The past is something you remember now. The future is something you predict now. And the now isn't really there because it doesn't matter how small it is. You can cut it into 3, past, present, and future. So, maybe you can go to 10 to the minus 32 or 33. I forgot what the quantum, the quantum limit is, the Planck scale. But even the Planck scale, all it tells you is that 1 Planck time is the period, the maximum period in which you can have no change. That's all it means. It doesn't tell you that you cannot divide time further down. It just tells you that, nothing can happen for the length of a quantum, a Planck length. That's all. So the present is infinitesimally small. Doesn't matter how small you make it. It's smaller than that until it disappears. But all the past and all the future are in it. Are we in time? No, we are never in time. I think if we could make sense of time, a lot of other stuff would fall on their places. The greatest illusion, in the sense that it's a narrative we tell ourselves and believe, I think is time. Time, where is time? Show it to me. I mean, Augustine was already said that, right? If you ask me what time is, I will know. But if I have to tell you who asks, then I know not. We can't even define time without circularity. Oh, it's the interval between 2 events. But interval is just another word for time.
You know, I have a good friend I interviewed, James Driscoll. He's written a book called The God in Time. He's not a psychotherapist, but he's a Jungian thinker. He's got his degree in the study of Renaissance literature. And his attitude was practically diametrically opposed to yours. He would say there is no such thing as being outside of time, because anytime you report that you had an experience of transcending time, you're reporting about it in time.
It's impossible to deny that we experience something that goes by the name of time. I don't deny the experience. What I deny is that we need to account for that experience by imagining a dimension called time along which we flow in constant speed and can never go back. That model is what I deny. That idea that we are traveling through time, I deny that idea. But I don't deny the experience that leads us to think about it as traveling through time. Know what I mean? But there are people who deny space, but say time does exist. Time is the only dimension that exists. Elise Molin is one of those. And there are other physicists who say, I can write all the equations of physics using space, but not time. I can remove the t from all the equations. And one of them, Julian Barbour, wrote a famous book about it called The End of Time 20 odd years ago. So there is this fight within physics. They even, the latest fashion, loop quantum gravity, the latest attempt to try to fold relativity into quantum theory. The implication of loop quantum gravity is that time is an epiphenomenon. It's not an absolute pre-existing scaffolding in nature. It's something that arises from lower level quantum processes. So, even science sort of struggles with this notion of time. Is it primary or is it not even there at all? There are people defending all positions within the spectrum. I do my entire philosophy within the context of space and time because language requires that. If you want to be consistent with the position that time does not exist, then you cannot use verbs. You cannot use tenses, because verbs are actions unfolding in time. If you're not thinking about time, you cannot use verbs. And then you cannot speak. I do my stuff based on this presupposition that space and time do exist, but I think what we call events in space and time are projections from something that is not in space and time, shadows of something that is not in space and time. And the shadows exist. The shadows are real as shadows. And we are talking shadow instead of talking English, if you know what I mean. Or talking real, we are talking shadow. We are talking dashboard. We are not talking real. And it's okay because that's all we can do.
In your recent conversation with Tom Campbell, which is on another YouTube channel, and in fact, for the benefit of our viewers, I should link to it in case anyone wants to check it out. I'll put a link right there in the upper right-hand corner. He would say, or did say in this interview, that our bodies are not real, that he said they are avatars. And I think he was using not real in a different sense than you would use it, because they are real as avatars, and the simulation is real as a simulation, is one way of putting it.
We get lost in language a lot.
Yeah.
Even the word simulation, what do you mean by it? Do you mean that there is some kind of meta-material reality where a computer was built and it's running this material reality as a simulation? Or do you just mean that things are not what they seem to be? You can use the simulation word in both cases, and they mean completely different things.
There are people who argue for simulations and suggest that there's some advanced extraterrestrials in some planet in a distant part of a different galaxy, and we are living inside of a computer that they built.
We mythologize. We have never always mythologized throughout history, right? We can't get rid of it. Even if you are a nihilist, materialist, the impulse to mythologize comes back and bites you in the butt. And like the whole transhumanism thing, it's a religion. It's a materialist religion. based on the notion that we will have the power to resurrect people by putting their atoms together again in the way they were. Like, beam me up, Scotty, and we will beam people back from the past by reassembling things or creating computer versions of them, like Ray Kurzweil wants to have his dad back by building a computer simulation of his dad. So, the man lost his father when he was young. So did I. I was 12 when I lost my father. I understand the psychological impetus, the need for people to tell themselves some kind of narrative that provides a hope for a return, which I think is probably one of the artifacts of our notion of time. We think time only moves forward and that whatever is in the past is lost. So Kurzweil will never see his dad again. That's what he thinks. I think if we really understood what's going on, it would be a very different story. We would understand that if something once existed, then it exists, and it's the end of the story.
We had a previous conversation about the block universe, which I think is what you're alluding to here, because let's go back to that. I think it's worth exploring it again. The idea is that it starts with Einstein's theory of general relativity. The notion that Einstein's theory has been proven over and over again empirically. It's a deterministic theory, and therefore, because it is a deterministic theory, you can say that all past and future events exist in a block.
Yeah, so that's arguably a direct implication from general relativity, because under general relativity, time can flow in different speeds. Only the speed of light in a vacuum, that's the universal constant. And the relative order of events can change depending on the observation point. Now, for that to work, you have to grant that everything that has ever happened and will happen exists at once in sort of like a loaf of bread. That loaf of bread contains all time, not only all space, but all time. For space, we don't have problem imagining it. I'm not in China right now. I have been to China many places, but China is there. It's not in my experience right now. I'm not experiencing it right now, but I can go there. I can traverse space and go there. So the block universe is exactly the same, but you add time to it. In the same way that China still exists right now, even though I'm not there, the past still exists right now, even though we are not there. And our experience of life is a particular way of slicing that bread loaf. And you don't need to slice it in parallel slices. You can slice it at angles as well. And although for us in practice, it's not possible to go to the past, the theory seems to require, from a philosophical perspective, the theory is a scientific theory. It predicts the behavior of nature. It doesn't make philosophical assertions. But if you think philosophically about it, if you think about the metaphysical implications of the theory, it seems to imply that all past and all future have to exist. And they are not accessible to us because we have traversed them already or haven't traversed them yet. The knife slicing the bread is us. And that knife may have already been there or may still need to be there. But either way, the bread is still there before and after the knife. That's the idea. And I think it's probably one of the best objective substantiations for the notion that, and that's a philosophical notion, that the past and the future are ontically real. That if anything has ever existed, then it exists, even though we cannot reach it through our human cognition, because we are traversing this block in a particular way, and we don't know how to change the direction of the way we are traversing it. But the fact that we can't go back there doesn't mean that it doesn't exist anymore. It's still part of the block, and will always be part of the block. I think that holds water. I think this is coherent and probably inevitable.
Well, we can experience things through our imagination. Theologists or theologians often talk about Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end of the world. They have this vision, and a theologian like Matthew Fox talks about the coming of the cosmic Christ, when we will all be united at the end of the time within Christ. So there is a sense that through the imagination, or you might say if you were parapsychologically inclined, through remote viewing, we can go there. We can step outside of the limitations of our five senses.
Arguably, that's maybe what memory is. It's a noisy channel through which we actually go back there. And it's noisy because it's not a clear picture. We sort of, embellish it or distort it. But maybe that's what memory is. But, we have had this discussion before. I think there is one of the differences we have in perspective is that I suspect that individual identity doesn't survive death. And I suspect that you suspect it does, based on the data that you have studied and I haven't. But one way to reconcile these two perspectives is to think that if anyone ever existed, then the person still exists and will always exist. And we don't need to get into the discussion of, when the dissociation ends, does personal identity end, or do you fall back into some kind of meta-dissociative process? I don't know. Do you think we survive as individuals after death?
Einstein, as you probably know, wrote a letter to the widow of his good friend, and arguing based on the idea of the block universe that his friend still exists, even though he's dead. And Einstein said, people who understand physics the way I do realize that we don't die.
Yeah, the time is a stubborn illusion.
Yeah.
I think that these were the words in that letter.
Well, here's how I view it, Bernardo. I think there are different levels, and I believe you probably think much the same from a certain perspective, as when you're working on your computers, you see reality in a particular way, and it works for what you're doing at that moment. So let's take the reincarnation data. There's a lot of data now, some 1,700 solved cases in which young children describe past lifetimes as soon as they're able to talk, pretty much. I used to live in such and such a village. I had such and such a parent. This was my name. And researchers have been able to identify, yes, that village existed, that family existed. The child is accurately describing it, and not as if I was watching a movie and I saw it, but the child is saying, this was me. This was my experience of who I am. So I think that's pretty good evidence for some form of survival. It's in my Bigelow essay, that would be one category of 9 different categories that all point towards survival. But we can go a little deeper if we look at the theological notion of Alpha and Omega, or the cosmological notion of the Big Bang emerging out of a singularity. It would suggest at one time in history, approximately 14 billion years ago, which was a pretty specific number, everything that we know of, all the stars and planets and constellations and sentient beings, existed in a single point, a dimensionless point. Everything was unified at that time, and people suggest at some point in the future the universe will collapse again back into a point, and maybe another universe will be born. And it's a kind of, in Hindu cosmology, birth and rebirth of universes over trillions of what we think of as years. So it seems to me that from different perspectives, there are many different ways of looking at identity and reality and what we think of as truth.
If you look at the reincarnation cases, how do you imagine it? In what terms do you imagine what's happening? Do you imagine an entity leaving one body and entering another? How do you imagine it?
Yeah, I would say that is pretty much it. You could call it a soul, different than a spirit. That a soul would be like a human being, but not in a physical body. The soul has a different kind of a body. You could call it an astral body, or some people would say an etheric body, or a spirit body. It has a membrane. It has an inside and an outside, but it's not the same as this body right here. And it can inhabit a physical body. It's sort of like the old notion of the ghost in the machine. And I know it's a pretty old-fashioned, contradictory notion. It probably doesn't withstand philosophical scrutiny, but it certainly does feel like the best way of thinking about the reincarnation empirical data.
And the spirit, you said the soul is not spirit.
Yeah.
What would be spirit in this context?
Spirit in this context would be something that doesn't have any inside or outside. Spirit would be, you could think of it as sort of universal consciousness that we all share.
So the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, you could call it the Holy Spirit, or you could think of it as one of my mentors, Arthur Young, used to make a very careful distinction between spirit and soul. I don't know if we've ever discussed his work. He was the inventor of the Bell helicopter, so he was very gifted in technology, but after that was the very first commercially licensed helicopter. He began exploring cosmology in a spiritual sense after that, and he noted that almost all the spiritual traditions distinguish between spirit and soul. So the soul is something that has an existence in space and time, from lifetime to lifetime, for example, but the spirit is something much more profound and deeper. The spirit might be related to teleology or purpose. That's whereas the soul is much like the way it's used in vernacular culture when we talk about a person is very soulful. It has to do with our desires, our longings, our passions, and they seem to propel us from lifetime to lifetime.
I think you suspect this about me, but maybe the audience doesn't, because they see me defending a certain position and that position staying consistent with that. But I don't have much pride in myself, but there is one thing that I think was an advancement at some point in my life. I think I am keenly aware of the limitations of conceptual discourse and logic, and the values of the Enlightenment. I'm keenly aware that they're very useful, but they can only take you so far and not beyond. I'm keenly aware that there is absolutely no reason to think that reality has to conform to our categories. It's absurd to think that. It's we that have to conform to reality, not the other way around. So I know there is a limit to what we call rational reasoning and empirical-based reasoning and internal consistency and empirical adequacy and all that good stuff, all of those values. And when it comes to things of tremendous significance, archetypal things like life and death, I think there is a good chance that we just do not have the cognitive apparatus. We don't have the intellect yet to grasp every salient point of what's happening in nature in a satisfactory way. We are bound to make mistakes or to not see the whole picture if we restrict ourselves to conceptual reasoning and empiricism. Because why would our perceptual apparatus evolve to even perceive everything that is relevant for philosophy? Of course, it wouldn't do that. It would evolve to perceive everything that is relevant to survival, not for philosophical questions. So there might be a whole lot of stuff going on out there that it's not even a matter of electromagnetic scale. I'm not talking about X-rays here. I'm talking about things for which we do not have a category, a conceptual category. So I'm open to all that, and I don't dismiss what mythologies across history have been saying, which you mirrored right now, the idea of soul and spirit and reincarnation of some form of personal identity. But I don't know how to argue for that on a strict, consistent, conceptual basis based on undeniable empirical evidence. So I don't do that. I argue for what I feel I can argue, for what the intellect tells me. Now, this is solid stuff. You are on very solid ground here. And I often refrain from speculating about what I'm leaving out by adopting these artificial boundaries, because I don't want that stuff to be taken out of context. I don't want somebody to take a clip from a YouTube video and say, look, Bernardo, he believes in I don't know, the aliens from the Pleiades or the heart vibrations from the galactic center. I don't think these things are literally real, but I know that people experience things like this. And when mind produces a mythology that is intense and compelling like this, usually there is something to it. It's not literal. It's not what it seems to be, because mind doesn't speak literal. Mind speaks metaphor. Only the intellect, a small part of the mind, speaks literal. But I'm not as close to this stuff as probably most of your audience would think that I am.
Well, I've had the benefit of interviewing you now on most of your books. We've done an interview on More Than Allegory. We've done an interview on Dreamed Up Reality. So I think of you as a psychonaut in some ways. And I know recently in the Tom Campbell interview that we mentioned, you described yourself as being sort of thick-headed and not a person who easily experiences altered states of consciousness unless you've had a very strong dose of psychedelics. But you have had. And it seems to me that, at least in my case, I feel like I was permanently changed in very positive ways by the use of psychedelics. It's what propelled me to go into parapsychology in spite of all of the social risks involved. And now, fortunately, at the age of 75, I can look back and say it was the right decision.
I am thankful to what psychedelics did for me as well. There is a way in which they the greatest value for me has been the direct experience of not having certain artificial filters in the way I think, of being able to examine assumptions that I didn't even know were assumptions, if you know what I mean. It clears the clutter and gives you a sort of incisively real picture of your own mind and what it does and how it fools you, how it fools itself. And that has been of tremendous value. I didn't start thinking about these things because of psychedelics. Psychedelics happened later in my life than some of my stylized stories in some of the books suggest. It happened in my 30s when I was already thinking about that. And I thought, it wouldn't be diligent to do philosophy of mind without exploring mind, which is the greatest error that happens in analytic philosophy today. The vast majority of analytic philosophers have no clue what the subject of their study is, mind. They do not know mind. They have never explored mind. So how can I, write theories about it? It's a hopeless endeavor. But I am wary of psychedelic noses. People who have a psychedelic trip and come back saying, "Oh, I know what's going on. It's the aliens doing this and that, and the entities that are keeping the veneer of the world in place. They're busy working behind the scenes." And I'm like, we are forgetting that mind speaks to itself symbolically through imagery. And the problem is that I think our culture, and this is incredibly difficult to talk about, so I never talked about it. We have this this idea, this deeply ingrained idea that mental and real form a dichotomy. That if something is generated by your mind, oh, then it's not really real. So if it feels really real, then it could not have been generated by your mind. And then the aliens from the Pleiades really have to be beings inhabiting rocks in the Pleiades system or something like this. We need to sort of put it in one of the two baskets. It's either mental or hallucinated or self-generated stuff, or it's objective and real and solid and firm, and therefore not mental and not hallucinated. And I think this is not subtle enough to allow us to understand what's really going on. There certainly is a difference between your personal hallucinations and the world that is really out there, but both are mental. It's a matter of how consensual the imagery is. It's not a matter of is it imagery or not. No, it is imagery. So it's real in that sense. The aliens from the Pleiades are real in the sense that they are imagery generated by mind. But so is your real world. It's just that other mental mechanisms are involved that make it a kind of imagery that doesn't belong only to yourself. It's consensual imagery. There are, topologies of mind here at play that are transpersonal. And that to me was brought to life with psychedelic trances, these hyper-real trances in which you experience other realities with that pungent certainty. No, this is really real. It's more real than my ordinary life. And then you come back thinking that stuff is the reality. Well, what it's really telling you is that, or you come back thinking that stuff was outside mind, that it was some kind of standalone reality, independent from the imagery that your mind produces. And I think the real message is, look, if your mind could conjure up a felt sense of reality there, then it might be doing the same right now. This, too, may be imagery. And you think it's really real because mind can generate this feeling that it's really real. And it doesn't need anything outside of itself to generate this feeling, this is real. I think that's the message. Not that the aliens from the Pleiades are real and outside mind, but that the sense of reality we have right now is also it's also conjured up by mind. It's very difficult to get that across because when I tell people it's just imagery, they think, oh, you're telling me it's not real. And I'm like, you have to look one layer deeper. You have to peel the onion of hidden assumptions one layer deeper to understand what is actually going on. What's actually going on is that the real you, the subject, not the ego, but your core subjectivity is making the whole shit up. Know what I mean? When you are in profound trance states, I think your level of dissociation is tremendously reduced. So the I that experiences the trance is not your personal I. And that I is really making that stuff up, everything. Because that's how mind talks to itself. It's the only way mind has to talk to itself. It is to deceive itself through imagery. There is no other game in town. It's the only way mind can talk to itself in order to make sense of itself. And therefore it feels real because guess what? It's real in the same sense that this is real right now. This is also mind generated. It's generated by a broader mind, not your personal mind. But when you are in a trance state, you are that broader mind and you are making all that stuff up. It's very difficult to get this across. I don't know if I succeeded partially.
Well, you're reminding me of the phrase you often cite from Schopenhauer about the one mind that sees through the eyes of every living creature.
Yeah, he called it the one eye of the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of, for me, the foundation right there. of reality. That's what I come back to ultimately over and over and over again. And in a sense, if we apply that idea to reincarnation, well, yes, reincarnation doesn't exist in the way I just described of souls traveling from body to body. But at another level, that's the best description we have.
I think it's perfectly valid. Actually, it's a very scientific thing to do. It's called building a model. And scientists that have their eyes on the metaphysical ball, they know that theoretical entities in science, they may exist or they may not, and it doesn't matter, because that's not the point. What we need to have is to propose entities and dynamics between these entities such that nature behaves as though those entities were true. And those theoretical fictions, which is the technical name for them, believe you or not, theoretical fictions is what we call them, they are operationally very useful because if they are devised correctly, then nature behaves as though they were true. So they give you a sort of a handle, a way in terms of which to think about nature that facilitates prediction. The problem is that we lose sight of the fact that our convenient fictions are just models, that they are just convenient fictions. We start thinking that they are real. The whole notion of feuds in physics is a convenient fiction. Some of the elementary subatomic particles, I mean, it's difficult to say that of an electron, but even an electron, I mean, nobody has seen an electron. Because it doesn't spontaneously emit photons when it's alone somewhere, trapped in an electromagnetic cage. These are theoretical fictions that give us a sort of a handy operational way in terms of which to think about what's going on. But we tend to then conclude that they really are there, that quantum fields really objectively exist. Even though you cannot measure them, you can only measure their effects, which is the definition of fields. Fields are things that you can only measure in terms of their effects. In other words, they're just convenient fictions. They're a conceptual handle to facilitate our approach to things. I don't know whether I shared this with you ever. I did share in a couple of interviews. The Higgs Boson, which made news some time ago.
The God particle.
The God particle. What terrible name. But in 2012, we announced that we found the Higgs Boson. Fabiola Gianotti, who used to be my colleague now, she's the director general at CERN, put a slide on a projector. The CERN auditorium was filled. I think that thing has capacity for 200 or 300 people. It was filled. And there was a whole story, 45 minutes in which Fabiola was sort of preparing the audience for the big announcement. And then she flashes one slide. It's a histogram of an energy histogram. I think it was, I think it was an energy histogram that she flashed. And she didn't say a word. And the entire auditorium erupted in applause and screams, I can understand. I even get, we call it in Dutch kippenvel, when your hair follicles sort of pop and then like chicken, goosebumps is the name. Yeah. I get that because, I was there at CERN, in the mid-90s when we were beginning with building the Atlas detector, one of the detector that really found, CMS also contributed. But I was building all that stuff, and our dream was, okay, we have to find the Higgs, and there was it. But if you look at that slide, people think we saw the Higgs. No, we saw an energy distribution, a little graph, a little line on a paper with 2 dimensions. There is a little line there that goes down like this, and then whoop, there's a little bump, and then continues. That little bump, that's the Higgs. That's our finding, the Higgs boson. Why? Because the Higgs is not a thing. It's not a concrete thing. For one, it doesn't interact with measurement equipment. Nobody ever measured a Higgs boson. It is impossible. Why? Because it doesn't survive long enough to interact with a measurement surface. It decays, we call it. The Higgs existed a tiny fraction of a second after the Big Bang, and then that was it. And what the LHC does, it reproduces the energy levels that were present then, very shortly after the Big Bang. So the Higgs momentarily pops into existence and immediately decays into other things. What we measure is the trash left behind by the Higgs, which we then plot in graphs, and we say there was a Higgs. So we are just confirming a convenient fiction, not a billiard ball, if you know what I mean. Most of our understanding of nature today consists of handy, convenient fictions. In other words, we don't really have a clue what is actually going on. We can only predict nature's behavior to some extent, and we think we understood it. Of course we didn't. A 5-year-old kid understands how a game behaves, can be world champion in the game without having any clue what's actually going on, all the hardware and software that goes into that game. The kid has a convenient fiction. What is that convenient fiction? If my avatar touches that wall, I die. If my avatar shoots that other character, I score points. That's the convenient fiction. The game works as though walls were being touched and characters were being assassinated. It works. That convenient fiction works. The kid can be world champion. Does the kid know what's going on? The kid doesn't have the faintest clue of what's going on. The fictions work, and that's science. The fictions work. If the fictions work, if we can predict things accurately, that's good science. We can build good technology. We can win the game. We can be world champion. Does that mean that we know what's going on? We haven't got a clue.
Well, could you apply that same thinking to life in general, for example, to your career as opposed to science?
It's a question of how conducive to daily life this kind of thinking is. When I'm playing a computer game, I'm not thinking about the software and hardware that's going on. I've built computers in my life. I have a pretty good idea of what's going on, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm playing the game. I'm adopting the convenient fiction. I'm an avatar. I have to shoot there. I have to enter that door. If I fall there, I die. I score points if I do this or that. I'm operating on the basis of the convenient fiction. And I think for our daily lives, that's what you have to do. You have to operate as if the convenient fictions were true. But when it comes to existential questions, then I think we have to remind ourselves that we are just 5-year-old kids playing a game and we have no clue what's actually going on. So it's preposterous to say to yourself, life has no meaning. It's all for nothing. This is preposterous. It's beyond arrogant. It's just inadmissible. You are absolutely wrong if you say this to yourself. Who do you think you are? You haven't got a clue. Oh, but my life has been suffering all along. There has only been suffering, nothing else. None of my dreams came true. So it's for nothing. No, you don't know that. You're part of nature. You don't know what nature's doing. You don't know what is the impetus behind what's happening. You don't know where you came from. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you are, let alone who you are. You don't know what you are. You have no clue what's going on. You're playing the game, and you're trying to make sense of the game. It is preposterous to say it's all for nothing, as it is preposterous to say the opposite. We don't know. And I think this is what brings life to real life. It's what makes reality scintillate. We don't know. Just if you can wrap your head around that, we do not know. We haven't got a clue. Now, the world scintillates.
Well, there's some things you know. You were describing earlier to me that you have been driven by some force of which you're not really conscious to pursue a career in philosophy, and in particular an idealist philosophy. You know that.
Yeah, there are little things I think I know. We know lots of little things, and lots of little things that work in the sense that things behave as though those little things were really true. But Jeff, I don't know what the daimon is. I personalize it because it gives me a handle. That's my convenient fiction. I think of the daimon as an individual other than me. But I feel the daimon's urges. I only know the daimon insofar as I can think and feel what it thinks and feels. So how do I know that it's a daimon outside of me? Well, because I feel that its agenda has nothing to do with me. It doesn't give a damn whether I'm happy or not, whether I have a roof over my head or not. That it's not remotely in the radar scope of the daimon. The daimon is a historical thing across space and time. I don't know what it is. So I don't know what it is. I just have a convenient fiction regarding the daimon, which gives me a handle. It gives me some form of moral autonomy, because to make myself responsible for everything just drives you crazy. You can't go there. So the idea of a daimon as an individual of some sort that acts through me, and I communicate with it by thinking its thoughts and feeling its feelings, feeling its fears. The daimon has fears. Mine has some big fears. And that it allows me to operate alongside the daimon. But if you ask me, do I know what's going on? Haven't got the faintest clue. I had one psychedelic experience once in which the daimon was really personalized, and I had this notion in my mind, it's the wingman. The daimon is the other entity. It's like your brother. He sits in the background. He knows what's actually going on. And you go into the labyrinth, you go into the game, and your wingman is supporting you from behind the walls, behind the veneer of reality, so to say. But if you ask me, does that mean then that I discover what the daimon is? No, I think that was my mind producing some imagery to help itself understand what the daimon is. The daimon is something done by mind, but mind doesn't know itself. Mind doesn't really know what's going on. And I don't think we really grasp this. This is also the source of all meaning. If mind knew exactly what was going on, then all of our suffering is for nothing. It's some kind of cruel game. It's revealing nothing. It's research, very difficult research, dangerous research to find out something that your boss already know. What the hell? Why am I going through this? You know what I mean? I don't think it's like this. This is real research. The boss doesn't know the answer. The boss is confused.
I know there are paradoxes involved in all of this. You've written, I think, is it correct to say 12 or 13 books at this point in time?
Strictly speaking, 10 of my sole authorship. But if you include books for which I contribute, it's probably 15.
Okay, so somewhere between 10 and 15 books. And one might say, given our discussion earlier of the block universe, that before you put the first word down on paper, they were already written.
Yeah. Well, when I start, I still don't know the words, but there is something pregnant around here. This is the key area for me. It's somatized around here, between the upper chest and the throat, there is something pregnant there, and it feels bad. It's not comfortable. It needs to be vomited. Sorry for the imagery, yeah. But it needs to be expurged for me to have rest again. If you ask me, do I like that kind of stuff? I don't like to be in that position at all, Jeff. It's so often it has happened. Middle of the night, I wake up because I had a dream, an idea lands, and I have to stand up and come here at 4 a.m, even though I have to go to work at 8:30. So often that happened. That there are things you have to do in your life. There are problems you haven't solved and stuff you have to deal with, but you can't because you are in the clutches of that thing. You have to sit and write. No, that's not fine. That's why I personalize it, because it gives me some moral ground. I don't have to beat myself up for arriving at work sleepy or for having failed to do things I had to do. I externalize that thing. So it gives me some kind of moral space to exist as an individual without having to be overburdened with responsibilities that I cannot possibly account for, or being made to feel guilty for things that actually are not really under my control. Do you experience? I always had the impression that you probably have a Daimon too, but
I don't know. I think my experience of life is unique to me, and it's very different from yours, for sure. In the Bigelow essay, I talked about a very pivotal experience in my life that occurred in 1972 when I had a dream of my great Uncle Harry. And when I woke up from that dream, I was crying tears of joy and simultaneously singing. I remember the experience of waking up more than the dream itself, but I still do remember the dream. And of course, there were many factors that propelled me to pursue a career in parapsychology, but that was probably the single biggest one. And now I look back over 50 years since I had that experience, almost to the month, and I can say there must have been something real, very real about it. It felt realer than real, as many people describe, because my life was transformed. I went in a very different direction. I was studying criminology at the time, and now I can look back and say I've spent a half a century exploring parapsychology primarily, and that dream was the catalyst. To me, that's indicative of something more than just a fantasy.
But that dream was a good dream. So you were positively propelled forwards. In other words, you were attracted from the front and not kicked from behind, right?
Well, actually, if I was to describe it in detail, Uncle Harry and I had some disagreements with each other that were part of the dream.
Oh.
I normally don't talk about it, but you can imagine he was of a different generation. He was 50 years older than me. And so he disapproved of certain things in my life, like my relationship with the girlfriend I had at the time. He didn't like the idea that men and women should treat each other equally.
And does Uncle Harry, over the next 50 years, did he come back to maintain the impulse to put you right back on the path, or that one thing was enough?
It was pretty much that one thing, although I will say this. On one occasion, subsequently, just one occasion, I got really stoned and I began, in my mind, reliving the dream. And it brought me to the point where I was experiencing those same tears of joy, which was a very intimate sense of being connected with some very loving being at a spiritual level. It's very hard to put into words, but I don't think Uncle Harry has been a constant presence with me. I simply think that that was a moment in which, through the aid of a very mild psychedelic, marijuana, I was able to recapture the memory of what happened in the dream.
I feel jealous. With me, it doesn't go through attraction. It's better now, so maybe I'm even able to talk about it now. 2 years ago, I wouldn't be able to talk about it because I'll probably sort of fall apart. But with me, sometimes I feel like, I'm a horse, and there's somebody just hitting me from behind to keep going. At some point in my life, when I started thinking about these things in my early to mid 30s, I had never been a hypochondriac in my life. I was the opposite. I always had that inner certainty. Whatever happens in my body will take care of it. And then I'm in my mid-30s when I started thinking about these things, and I became a hypochondriac. And hypochondria is terrible because you can't escape it. You bring your body with you wherever you go. So if you are obsessed with finding something wrong with your body, and your body is a dynamic system, you feel things all the time. We ignore them normally, but a hypochondriac zooms into every little feeling and asks that deadly question, is this normal? And what I didn't know this for years, but today I look back and I recognize it. The self-induced suffering of health anxiety was crucial for me to think the right questions and have the impetus to write down the answers that would come. Because without that level of anxiety, I think I would be busy doing all kinds of other stuff that I liked. At 32, I was a director in a Europe top 50 company. Had enough money, live in a nice, relatively large house for Dutch standards. So, I had arrived, So why was I not having fun? Well, because that health anxiety work that a sort of it brings a degree of focus that is incredible. One, it forces you to stay at home. It forces you to ask questions like, what is death? What is life? What is this all for? If I die tomorrow, would it be okay? Or would it have been a bad thing? And then you start unfolding, that thread and leads in all kinds of directions. It forces you to do that. Health anxiety forces you. It's extremely confrontational. And now I look back and I realize there wasn't a single book of mine that didn't arise out of something like that. And what was peculiar is that there was only one moment when I really was convinced that, okay, now I have something deadly. It turned out I did have something very dangerous, but it wasn't deadly yet. So it was removed before I had a polyp, 2 intestinal polyps. But there was a point I was like, well, it's really 50-50. Colon cancer has killed 2 friends of mine, who were younger than me. And I couldn't do anything. I was incapable of eating, of doing work. There was only one thing I could still do. I could write. And unperturbed. And there was this thing in my mind, like I was writing some of the essays that are now published in Science Ideated. And while I was writing, I was completely focused on the writing, but there was this little part of my mind in wonder, watching that in wonder, like, my God, how is this possible? I truly believe I'm going to die. How can I be so focused on this thing? And I understand today what was happening. It's the bloody Daimon, man. Maybe I'm full of it. Maybe I'm getting crazy. But there is no other model that can accommodate it. Why would it prevent me from doing everything except writing? And why every single book has come out of that kind of stress? Because writing was a relief. It was the only thing that would give me relief. The one thing was writing. So I had to write all the time. And I had to think those questions that I didn't want to think about it. You can have what I call the vertigo of eternity. If you dive deep into these questions too much, it's not psychologically healthy. I didn't have an option. I couldn't come back and just have a banal life. It was not available to me. So it really felt like I was a horse and somebody was behind just slamming my behind and saying, you have to go, don't stop. I don't care how tired you are. I don't care how bad you're feeling. I don't care how anxious you are. You got to go. And that only improved in 2020, summer 2020, when all the essays of Science Ideated were done, and then suddenly, for the first time, well over 10 years, I didn't feel that I had to do something. The first time. I didn't feel like I have to wake up in the middle of the night and do something. It's amazing. It's what? It's going to be 2 years. Knock on wood that it continues like this. But it's a great relief. And that's why I said to you before, I know it's the Daimon because it doesn't care about me. It doesn't give a damn at all. It has its own fears, strange fears, but the fears are not about me.
What are the fears about?
These are not my fears, okay? These are the fears of the Daimon. My fears are different. My main fear right now is, what will the death experience feel like? Because I know you experience death, and you will pop on the other side. So it's not like there's nobody experiencing, so you don't need to fear. No, I fear. But the fear of the Daimon, it's almost, to put it in human terms, but the Daimon fears that the work and this may sound arrogant, but it's not, I don't feel it as arrogant at all. I'm putting it in practical terms. The Daimon fears that what it is doing through me will have the same destiny as Goethe. Goethe, the German poet, philosopher, scientist, he achieved a tremendous fame very early. He was 25 when Werther was published in 1774. So he knew fame and adulation all his life. So you would think, well, that was great. So why would we fear that destiny? Well, the Daimon fears it because, as Nietzsche put it, Goethe failed in changing the course of German intellectual history. In other words, if you would have removed Goethe from the board, the game would have continued the same way. It's like a rook in the corner that never got to be used, if you know what I mean. That's the Daimon sphere.
We need more time to look at Goethe. I know he had a huge influence on Rudolf Steiner. I've been to the Goetheanum, this magnificent building dedicated, named for Goethe. And Steiner seems to really attribute a huge portion of his elegant metaphysical philosophy to Goethe. So I think Goethe's work lives on. It's been a big influence on me.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear, Jeff. Maybe the time is still to come. What happened very shortly after him? He died in 1832, I think. 1832. So what happened after him was just downhill. It was the antithesis of what he tried to say in Faust. We descended into the death of God, like Nietzsche put it. And then we descended further into positivism and behaviorism. It's been a shit show. So, but I understand you. You're saying we didn't look at a wide enough window yet. More time has to transpire for us to really see the impact Goethe ultimately will have had. That's hopeful. I'm not comparing myself to Goethe. This is the Daimon's thing. Far from me to compare myself to a giant. So it's not about him. It's about the fact that such a visible figure, if you stick to the short window I'm considering, such a visible, apparently successful figure could have failed so terribly in what actually matters. Because what actually matters is not fame. It's not the medal Napoleon put on Goethe's chest. It's not adulation. It's not money. That's not at all what matters. Goethe had all that. So the Daimon sphere is you can have all you think you want, Bernardo. But my fear is, despite you getting all that, it will have been for nothing. Failure. Yeah, that's not my fear.
That's not your fear.
It's the Daimon's fear, but I feel the Daimon's fear.
Since you brought up Goethe, and I related Goethe to Steiner's work, let me recount an incident I'm thinking of. It was the summer after my sophomore year in college. I don't think I'd ever even smoked a joint at that point. I'd never had any marijuana. I don't think I even had much in the way of spiritual feelings at all. I was home for the summer. I was attending summer school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was in the student cafeteria. I was taking a course on playwriting, as I recall. I had an interest in theater. And somebody walked into the cafeteria and handed me a flyer. And the flyer said on it, I saw 2 words, spiritual science. It was about the teachings of Rudolf Steiner. And at that moment, just seeing those 2 words next to each other, spiritual science, I had this sense of, maybe it was Kundalini or something, like electricity running up and down my spine. Something was awakened just by those 2 words. And it led me to Steiner, and it led me to Goethe through Steiner. As a result of that, there was something literally electric, at least it felt like it was electric going on. It probably wasn't exactly electric, but when I think of the work I'm doing today, like right now with you, one of the things that keeps me going, that propels me, is that I hear from viewers. And typically the viewers will say things like, you have no idea how meaningful this is to me, how much it's transformed my life, because I wasn't aware of all these ideas you discuss. And now you've made them part of my life. And you, Bernardo, are a big part of that. You are a hero to many, many people who have an intuitive sense of idealist reality, the primacy of consciousness, the mental world in which we're embedded. And you are probably more than anyone else that I know of out there in public, stating it over and over and over again, and on places like the Scientific American website.
I'm the hero's horse.
Well, you're on a hero's journey of sorts.
But I am the horse.
A lot of heroes seem to do it unwittingly. Luke Skywalker didn't want to be a hero either.
Yeah, and I had the same initiation he had, loss of the parents, which is what sets you out into the world. And looking back, that surely the death of my father when I was 12 was pivotal into what my life has become. That's absolutely for sure. But when you're younger, you have this romantic view of the hero's journey, and you imagine that if you are in the hero's journey, that it's such a great thing, that you would feel sort of inflated. And, it's a bloody difficult journey. It doesn't feel glamorous. If there was no Daimon, I wouldn't have done it. Why? I mean, why? I was a director at 32. I loved the company I worked for. I could have made a lot more money in my life. My career could have progressed. I easily could have been senior vice president today. I had a colleague 2 years older than me. Today, he's one of the couple of executive vice presidents and board members of an Europe top 50 company. Probably if I had pursued that path, I'd be depressed right now, looking for the meaning of it all. I would probably be rich. I mean, I have enough. I'm privileged cannot complain about that at all. But I didn't do this with a smile on my face, and I went along kicking and screaming. I don't know if it happens the same way to many people, but maybe the reason for this is that, as you correctly pointed out earlier, I have a very hard head. I don't have this kind of, transcendent experiences spontaneously. I have to break through the window to let fresh air enter. The windows don't open by themselves like they seem to do with a lot of people I know. But the picture I have running in my mind is that, the Daimon was talking to another Daimon. It's a myth. The Daimon was talking to another Daimon, thinking about what they had to accomplish and who they needed to do in order to, to be the tool to sort of allow that stuff to express itself, and they didn't know how. And then I passed by, and they picked inside my head, and that guy has the right conceptual dictionary. He has the right terms. He has the right categories. It's going to be him. And then they lassoed me, and the rest is history. That's the picture I have. I don't want to put down the Daimon, because the Daimon has made my life rich in meaning. And despite all the pain and the anxiety and the suffering, my life is rich in meaning. So I'm very grateful for that. But it's pretty tough love.
Since you've been using the word Daimon over and over again, I think it might be useful to point out that, at least for me, the first time I ever encountered the word used that way was in the dialogues of Plato concerning Socrates.
That's right. So Socrates had this voice in his head that he didn't identify as his own voice, that would always tell him if he were in the wrong path, the voice would jump in and say, no, don't do that. So it was not an affirming Daimon, it was a cautioning Daimon. And, famously, when Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens because of his philosophical ideas, he was put on trial, and he would have gotten away with his life if he had just apologized. But he figured that he wouldn't apologize, that he would defend himself and say that he was not corrupting the youth, that philosophy was important and all that. And in the course of doing that, he knew he was going to be sentenced to death. But his Daimon never said, stop now, don't go there, don't do it. And so sure enough, he was convicted, and then he had to drink hemlock, the poison. And he was gathered with his friends and students just before and during the process of drinking hemlock. And then the students asked him, do you regret not having, defended yourself in a way that would secure your release? And he said, no, my Daimon never said stop, never said no. So I know that I did the right thing. And of course, he had the option to go into exile instead of drinking hemlock. But he chose to die, because for a Greek of 70 years old to go into exile, it's worse than death. And his Daimon also didn't stop him from drinking hemlock. So it was the right course. And that the young Plato was in attendance. And of course, clearly that marked Plato very much, because he proceeded to write extensively about Socrates. I would prefer that kind of Daimon. I think I have the worst. I cannot say that, because I'm sure somebody has a worse Daimon. But the Daimon it's a presence in your mind that doesn't have you as a concern, doesn't give a damn about your personal agenda, and talks to you by allowing you to think its thoughts, to feel its feelings. But when you feel those feelings, you feel like this is alien. I don't know how to describe it. It feels alien. It's thoughts that feel like, this isn't me. This isn't me. But it's not a voice in my head like it was for Socrates. Psychology was different back in the day. I don't know all the story about the breakdown of the bicameral mind and all that stuff. I don't know whether Socrates just, turned part of his own mind into a voice. In my case, it's not a voice. It's just a very felt agenda that I just do not recognize as my agenda. It's not mine. It's not good. I don't want it.
Well, you referred to a sensation in your throat area and you know, in yoga terms, that would be the throat chakra. And in yoga terms, you have deities, you know, moving through your body and expressing themselves through the chakras.
It right here. It's around the thyroid, right around here. You know, low in the neck, high in the chest. It's very physical, that feeling. And it's the same feeling that I have when I'm suffering an attack of anxiety. It's here as well. So it is highly correlated. You know, the producing a book is like a hot ball of iron that pops in here and then just has to come out. And the clamping fear of anxiety is also here. The clamping, like a vice is clamping you here. It's the same feeling. It's amazing. You know, I've done therapy for several years. Of course, all this stuff, it's well beyond psychology, official psychology today. So my therapist didn't know much, you know, what to do. At the end, you know what helped? Finishing the idea of the world was seminal. I have that feeling. I had that feeling that, okay, now at least the core of the thing is done. You know, there are ancillary and other things and bonus I can gather, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to write more books, but it doesn't feel like that must, now. It doesn't have that feeling anymore. So finishing Science Ideated was a major thing. But another thing that happened is I screwed up with my alarm system at home. So the alarm went off in front of my head. I got terrible tinnitus, the sound of a dentist drill in both my ears, which in the Netherlands, it's a valid reason for assisted suicide. It's you can ask for assisted suicide because of uncontrolled tinnitus. Doctors don't know what to do. There's nothing that can be done about it. There is no cure. It doesn't kill you, but makes you want to die. And I always refused psychiatric medication. I didn't want to fool around with that. But with the tinnitus, when I was told, you know, there is some research that shows that tricyclic antidepressants can actually reduce the tinnitus. Other research shows that it can increase. So it's like a gamble. But I thought, you know, it's so bad right now. I had thought of suicide twice. It's so bad right now that, you know, how worse can it be? So I started a trial with amitriptyline. And it did reduce the tinnitus by like 75%. Miracle. It's like, how is that possible? Why don't doctors know this? Probably it doesn't work that way for other people. Maybe there are thousands of different kinds of tinnitus, but for me, it helped a lot. So I'm still taking it. And it relieved me from that feeling of the Daimon. I wouldn't say that I got rid of the Daimon because of the medicine. It's still there. It's a male presence. He's still there. But he released me a little bit, and the medicine sort of took the edge off a little bit. Not much, but it took the edge off. And another thing that helped a lot was to return to my computer hobby. It sort of put me in contact with my childhood again, which is my personal self. You know, when I'm building computers, I'm not being a horse. If you know what I mean. You know, I can be human. And when I'm designing computers and, you know, restoring old computers. So it's a discipline I have now. I always reserve some time for that. There will not be a week in which I will not be able to say I did something on a computer. So I'm very disciplined about that because it's a survival imperative. So these three things have helped a lot. So I'm much better off now than in 2019. It was tough. The world doesn't know it now. Now the world will know about
your struggles. And but let me ask you this, because I personally am not aware of anybody else who has been such a champion for metaphysical idealism as you have been the last 10 years. But maybe you can tell me, if you were to, God forbid, die tomorrow, who would be available to take your place?
I don't know, not because I don't think anybody can, but because what's happening is not my personal plan.
But I mean, is there anyone up and coming? Are there other people carrying the same mantle?
There are people defending idealism today. Itai Shani, an Israeli philosopher, is doing it. There are others, Eugene Nagasawa. So there are people doing that from an analytic perspective. There are people doing that from a scientific perspective. There is one person who was, well, maybe I will name him. If I had to name someone, that's the person I would name. Federico Fagin, the inventor of the microprocessor back in 1971, who left Intel in 74, the year I was born, to found Zilog and to build the Z80 microprocessor. And in that year, two fundamental things happened in association with my birth. The paper called What Is It Like to Be a Bat? The paper that reintroduced consciousness into the scientific debate. And Federico founding Zilog and building the Z80 processor, which is what set me on the path of computer engineering, computer science. I had a little ZX80 computer in 1980 with a Z80 processor in it. And of course, I opened it, and my father was telling me, my father used this old-fashioned terminology, the electronic brain, to refer to the microprocessor. And he said, this is the electronic brain. There are all kinds of little dual line package chips, and with this bigger chip, which was the electronic brain, the Z80. And I was sort of stupefied, like, wow, somebody built a brain. And I asked my father, so who built an electronic brain? And my father said, yeah, Mr. Federico Fagin. So that name was like with me since childhood. And Federico today, he's a champion of idealism. He's a physicist by education. He has published a book last year, Silicon, which is his biography and also an introduction to his philosophy. Wrote a paper with a famous Italian physicist, Dr. Dariano, relating quantum physics to consciousness, which is a tricky thing to do. It has been done badly many times. They did it right. They are doing it right. And it's difficult to point at Federico as a possible successor because he's 83, I think, and I'm much younger than him. I could be his grandson. But if you ask me, of all the people alive who really got it and has the Western language to talk about it, has the conceptual dictionary, the value system, the epistemic value system, to know how to put it in Western terms, following logic and empiricism and no woo-woo nonsense. No, he is the guy. I think he would rather see me as his successor because he was there ahead of me. But I can't help but, if you ask me this question, the image that comes to my mind is Federico's face.
That's a wonderful story. And there's a very interesting, I don't know if I could call it a synchronicity, but a big part of my life dovetails with that story, with this very same story. Well, you see, one of my very best friends who died now over 15 years ago was a fellow named Dean Brown, H. Dean Brown. He co-founded the Zilog Corporation with Federico, and he worked with Federico designing the Z80 chip.
Wow.
Yeah. I got to know him back in the 1990s because he was also one of the pioneers in the application of computers in the field of education. And he was a physicist, worked with Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton. And in fact, he played Go with Einstein because they were trying to use it as a way to figure out game theory, which had just been developed at that time. And then I used to play Go with Dean Brown. So I'd say, I'm playing Go with the guy who played Go with Einstein. He was an enormous influence on me in my development.
Does he still live?
No, as I say, he died about 15 years ago. We were very close. I thought of him as my best friend, even though he was much older. And I remember when he died, people would come up to me and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I would say, I wouldn't feel any sorrow. I never felt any sorrow at all when he died. I felt, honestly, I felt like I'll see him again someday. It's no problem.
So that's an inner certainty for you.
Yeah.
It's not a conceptual thought. It's something you feel in the body.
Yeah. And I have to say, it's maybe something peculiar about me. I never felt sorrow when my parents died. Of course, I was an adult. I wasn't, if I had been a child as you were, it probably would have affected me much differently. But when people who are close to me have died, I have only felt a sense of like, goodbye for now. I'll see you again.
That's wonderful. And do you know Federico as well?
I've never met him, but you're really inspiring me to reach out to him. Dean Brown used to talk about him.
He's probably, of all people alive, he's probably the only one that, because of the history, because I saw him as a superhero when I was a child, the man designed a computer brain, that made him a god right there. And I never really managed to get rid of that feeling. So I still look up to him a lot. When I talk to him, it's like, wow, I'm talking to a superior being. I don't have that with anyone alive. Even at CERN, I didn't have that with Nobel Prize winners who used to sit across the table from me on the canteen. I was disappointed with all that looking up very early. But with Federico, I still have it. He's probably the only person alive. So I'd love to watch him talk to you.
Well, knowing that he was a partner with Dean Brown in founding Zilog is very inspiring to me, because Dean Brown was that kind of a person. He was a genius in many, many different areas.
And he will talk about consciousness with you. He will talk about his personal experiences. He had a series of amazing personal experiences. I think you guys would connect amazingly well. You guys would go on a row. You have to book a few hours to talk to him. I don't think 1 hour will be enough. And he's a delightful personality. I mean, he's a delightful person to spend time with and talk to.
Well, I'm so glad this came up in our conversation. It would be a wonderful thing for me to reconnect with somebody who worked with the man who became my best friend. What did we talk about in our previous interview? The matrix of ideas.
Did we?
We were talking about synchronicity, and about synchronicity as replacing causality because of the, my friend Stefan Schwartz talks about it as the information architecture of the universe.
It's so self-evident that it is in there. There are a couple of self-evident things that we deny, right? Which is amazing, like telepathy. Happens all the time. It's banal. Or veridical dreams. Happens all the time. It's banal, but we deny that. And synchronicity. I've come to the point of trusting synchronicity. If I have a debate and I have to prepare for the debate, I don't go purposely digging all kinds of papers that intellectually I think I should read to prepare for the debate. I trust it will just come to me. It will present itself to me. Whatever is important will just come. So instead of reading 500 papers, I read 50. And amongst those, there will be the 5 that need to be read. Oh, it's an enormous difference, Jeff. So I'm gliding through life like this as well, trusting synchronicity.
And so you only have to read 50 papers instead of 500?
Well, it's an order of magnitude less, man.
The very thought of reading 500 papers just is too intimidating for me. That must be that Daimon driving you. Do you think that's even a possibility?
No, there are, science papers these days, especially experimental science, very quick to read because, it's about a hypothesis, experimental setup, methodology, results, discussion. It's very short stuff. You have to read the graphs. You have to understand the discussion, but it's short stuff. It's not like it's a long essay with complex ideas. No, it's just, okay, we hypothesize this. This is the experiment we are going to do. These are the results. That's the conclusion. It's stuff you can read. It's psychedelic papers. Whoa, you read it very quickly. Very quickly. Half an hour, you read a full psychedelic paper and you absorb everything that you need to absorb.
In half an hour?
Yeah.
So to read 50 papers takes 25 hours.
Well, but, you get tired after 5 or 6. You have to take a break. But experimental science papers are fairly quick to read. Physics is still a little bit more difficult because the methodology flows from the equations and the derivations of those equations, so they know exactly what to test. And then you have to follow the derivation of the equations, or you can just believe it. You just believe that they produce the right derivation. It's dangerous because even peer-reviewed papers these days, some stuff gets published that you go like, what? How did they miss this? But if you're in a hurry, you don't read the derivations. Just read the end equation and just look at the results. And it's not like reading philosophy essays. Those take take time, one a day.
Seem to have read recently someone saying that you're lucky if you just get people to read the abstracts of your scientific papers.
It's dangerous practice if you only do that. No, I tend to read. It's not difficult. You get the hang of it at some point. If you get the terminology, you can diagonally read it, especially things like, methodology. You can just scan it because it's usually all the same, how you do the controls, and it's trivial stuff. But you have to pay attention to things like if they do data pre-filtering, like all the data produced by the experiment, if they discard some of that data, you have to watch for that. But other than that, contemporary science papers, experimental science papers, very quick to read. It's turning into comic book. It's all figures. It's not like it used to be. It used to be a lot worse. Back in the 90s when I was studying and papers were heavy stuff. These days, you have PhD theses with 50 pages. That was the hypothesis. That's the experimental design. These are the results. End of the PhD. It's what?
Well, you're sort of bridging two worlds, both science and philosophy.
These epistemic divisions we impose on reality, right? In reality, there is just what's going on. If you limit yourself to one of our boxes, you're not getting the full picture. Modern philosophers, they pride themselves of being scientifically literate, but it goes wrong often there. And the other way around doesn't happen. Scientists, they don't think they need to understand philosophy. They know better. And then terrible philosophy comes out of science under the label science, like materialism. Materialism is a metaphysics. It's not a testable scientific hypothesis at all. It's a metaphysics. It's an inference about what nature is, not about how nature behaves. And scientific methods only tells us how nature behaves. Now, there are implications, I understand, but all these epistemic differences, it never sort of took hold on me. I have a friend, a psychologist. He's retired now after 40 years. He calls it the Renaissance approach. that you don't pay attention to epistemic categories. You just look at what's relevant. So I look at neuroscience, look at physics. It's fun stuff. It doesn't have the existential load of the bigger questions. It's not difficult to digest that stuff. It's intimidating, but it's not difficult.
Well, you've been very open. You've revealed a lot to me about your personal life and also about, some of the issues involved for you in doing the work you do, writing your books and debating with people and being a public intellectual as you are. I wonder if I could share with you the kind of issues that I'm dealing with.
Absolutely.
Get some advice, maybe.
Oh, who am I to do that?
Well, it's completely, I think, outside of the areas that you normally deal with, except a little bit in your book, Dreamed Up Reality. I recently was invited to write a foreword for a book that's being republished. And this is a book written by a French man. He died in 2018. He wrote the book in French, and maybe it was translated to English. It never did well. Then somebody translated it into Chinese, and apparently it's been a bestseller in China. And now and the individual who contacted me wants to translate it into some of the European languages because he thinks it'll do well. This man claims that the book is nonfiction, even though he's written subsequently several other books of fiction. He maintained while he was alive that this is a true story. And in it, he owned land. He was, I think, a farmer in Australia when he was contacted by aliens who took him aboard their craft across the galaxy to their planet on the other side of the galaxy. It was a 16-hour journey, and he spent 3 weeks on this other planet and was brought back here.
And that was recently, or because I heard a story like that, but from the 60s.
Well, I think this particular story was from the 1980s. Now, I can tell you I know of a half dozen similar stories, so I don't dismiss it out of hand, even though it reads like fiction. My wife, Janelle, who always gives me good advice, says, don't associate yourself with this at all. My mentor, Arthur Young, who I mentioned, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, used to say this is the most important thing you could possibly explore is people who claim that they're having face-to-face conversations with aliens.
So you want to know what I think?
Yeah, what would you think? And you are also aware of other similar stories yourself.
Yeah, the story is reported by Jacques Vallée in Passport to Magonia. I am not in the position you are. You don't have anything anymore to prove, Jeff. You are sitting on decades of legacy. I think the risk for you is limited. You are known for having an open mind and not being judgmental. It fits with that respected profile you already have. I don't think people will construe from this that you think the story is literally true. It will only mean that you think that there is something of significance in there, maybe psychological, maybe physical, you don't know, but it is worthwhile to look into. I don't think for you, in the position that you are, where you now are, 4, 5 decades of legacy, for me it would be highly risky.
Mm-hmm.
Because my persona is not that of an open-minded, understanding, wise human being. My persona is somebody who is incisively defending a particular perspective. So for me, it would be like I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. You know what I mean? Just not going there. It's part of the communications approach, so to say. Would I be personally curious? If I would find a book like that in the library, I wouldn't. I would probably dismiss it offhand. But with the intro you gave, I think I would like to read it personally. But I'm not going to be public about it other than just admit to this. It's not something I would write about. I wrote about weird stuff in Meaning in Absurdity. So it's not like, yeah. I stuck to things for which there is, quite objective evidence. Like there's a valley in Norway where unidentified things have been filmed, and there is radar traces. The scientists were there waiting for it when it happened, so there was time to prepare because it had happened before several times. So that's interesting. People know I am not closed-minded about it, but the way I interpret these things tend to be non-literal. I don't think a beryllium spaceship from the Pleiades landed here and took somebody on board and went on a relativistic trip for 3 weeks to another solar system. My impulse would be, this is not literally what happened, but did something happen? My impulse would be, yes, something significant happened. If somebody comes back and is courageous enough to tell that story, then it's like, it's much stronger than a very strong dream that wakes you in the middle of the night. Because when your mind really wants you to pay attention to something it sees from its perspective, and you don't from the ego perspective, it will jolt you out of sleep in the middle of the night so you can remember the dream. So a story like this, it's like mind went out of its way to make an impression. But mind speaks a metaphorical language, a symbolic language. So I would be interested in the symbolic perspective of what that might mean, I think. But yeah, if I were in your position, no, I wouldn't have any qualms about preserving my image. I mean, what do you have to prove? You were sitting on a mountain of legacy. No, I think you earned that. I haven't.
Well, you're fighting in a different arena than I am. I'm already known as a parapsychologist, but there's still a taboo against parapsychology. We could go on for a long time talking about, our intellectual enemies and the impact that they have. I got very sick when I was still a doctoral student, and outside skeptics began attacking me before I even got my degree or had completed my dissertation. They were trying to get the university to stop the whole program.
Of course, you're not the only person I know who has suffered like this. I mean, Rupert, not Spira, Rupert Sheldrake, a dead man. He has been on the crosshairs of some very funny people for so long. What I notice about me, however, if I were a target, I would savor it. I mean, when I am a target, because people have made a target of me, Massimo Pigliucci has made a target of me, and Jerry Coyne multiple times. It makes my day when that happens. It's a funny personality trait. I don't know why I am like this. But when somebody attacks, it's like, oh, okay, the gloves are off. Now I can give expression to that archetype that I normally try to contain. And maybe that puts people off from trying to do that. I don't know. But
maybe that's what your Daimon is pushing you to do.
Yeah. But did I tell you today already that the I Ching, I throw the I Ching once a year, and it told me, take it easy. You may not be the stronger one in the ring. You may get knocked off now and then. So I'm taking it easier, but I do enjoy it. I savor it. Debates, especially when it's a debate, because debate organizers now, they are in the habit of asking me, do you want to debate? But we want it to be a dialogue. In other words, we want you to keep your gloves on. And I'm like, man, come on, let me be myself. You want me to debate? Let me be myself. So it's not really appreciated overall. But I don't mind when people really go all out against me. Jerry Coyne does that, has done that multiple times. And I like the guy because of it. I sincerely like the guy. I think I would have a lot of fun having a beer with him. Because he has this, shoot first, ask questions later style, which sort of evokes some prior experience of mine in the corporate world, where your respect for someone grows in proportion to how hard they have beaten you. If you know what I mean.
We're very different in that regard.
I know a lot of people who are different in this regard. And the cruel thing is that because of it, people will not attack me, or at least not as much as they otherwise would. It's a psychological dynamics. Like, you attack people if you think you can get away with it without a reaction. With me, they know they're guaranteed to have a reaction very quickly.
Well, there's always this debate amongst parapsychologists. How hard should we fight back?
I think you should.
Yeah, there are some who say, people criticize parapsychology, we should destroy them.
Yeah, that would be my approach. Even if I'm not attacked, I will attack to sort of try to poke out some kind of dialogue, some kind of discussion. And look, it's not only because I like this style, Jeff. It's just that, as ASML's CTO has taught me over many years, Martin van den Brink is his name. He's not quite at the level of Federico Fagin for me, but I have enormous respect for him. He goes out of his way to irritate people when they are presenting material to him, to poke holes, to be nasty. And what I learned from him is that he does that in order to get everything possible out of the discussion. Because if you're too polite, if you're wearing velvet gloves and you're doing the British dance, well, I would like to perhaps point out that maybe you haven't seen a certain aspect of it quite accurately. Oh, no. Just say, you're full of shit. Just say it like that, because it forces people to try to defend themselves. And then everybody will put all the cards on the table, and that's the maximally productive interaction. So, Martin, I almost left the company in my first week because my job was to support the board of management with strategy. So I had to be there like every week. And in the first week, he went so out of his way to beat me down to a pulp. I thought, I can't work here. But after he beat me down to a pulp, basically saying, no, your story makes no sense. How dare you even come here to the 20th floor? And I thought, I have to leave. And then he walked behind me and did this on my shoulder twice. And then my boss was on the other side of the table. He looked at it with big eyes. And then after the meeting ended, he came to me and said, "You've done very well." And I said, "Caro, what do you mean? I was smashed in there. I think I have to leave the company." And he said, "No, you did very well. Martin interacted with you. He fought you. And he tapped you in the shoulder at the end." So he got exactly what he wanted. And over the years, I understood that. And I started doing the same because it is effective. So it's not like I want to be vicious. It's just that I want to get everything out of the debate. So if I have to poke Sabine Hossenfelder on her weak spots to make her spit something that she didn't spit out yet, I'll do that. So it's not evil. Some debate organizers think that I do that just because I enjoy being evil. I don't enjoy being evil. I enjoy putting everything on the table. Let's hash it all out. Let's make it visible. let's not come at this and waste time with, velvet gloves. I don't know whether you understand. You're a psychologist.
You're quick on your feet. You think quickly, and you're right there with a good response if somebody attacks you. I think for some people, they're a little slower. I think I'm a little slower. I like the interview format. I love this 3-hour format. It allows us to kind of really touch on many different topics and go more deeply into things, hopefully, than we would have done in our shorter interviews. When I was a graduate student in criminology, in the seminars there was a lot of debate. And what I discovered, or what it felt like to me, given my personality, is that the people who could shout the loudest got the most attention. And if you had a quiet, subtle point to make it, you weren't going to be heard at all in that environment. So I was happy to, transfer out of criminology and move into parapsychology where there were no other students to compete with.
It has to be content driven. It cannot be just who shouts the loudest. Otherwise you get nothing out of it. But there is something to be said about being emotionally engaged with the content you're putting forward, and not being too polite. Maybe there are environments where discussions are held where political correctness gets in the way of content. I feel that sometimes, especially in philosophy. There are certain quotes. People think, in philosophy, it's brutal. It's like the jungle, the law of the jungle. It's not. It's nothing compared to the corporate world. It's way too polite sometimes, philosophers. And if you have to walk a fine line between, not being perceived as somebody who is gratuitously vile, but making sure that the dynamics of the interaction is such that everything comes out, that everything is on the table, it's difficult. It's a difficult trade-off to make. I enjoy a lot when people are prepared to really go out against me, because nothing brings out more than that, if you know what I mean. When people really come, I had a debate with a famous atheist professor, an Australian. He has a funny name, I forgot his name. I had this debate with him last year. And I thought, this guy, he's going to come all out. It's going to be good. So I was all psyched when the debate began. But he stayed quite calm, and he basically interviewed me. So I was slightly disappointed with that, because I was looking forward to an engagement, which doesn't mean that we are going to slap each other in the face afterwards behind the stage. No, on the contrary. The more we engage, the more we will respect one another and be able to sit and have a beer afterwards. That's the mindset. That's the world in which I was for 2 decades. And I miss it. Sometimes I pick a fight for no reason out of philosophy. Like, I'm not going to tell you what my handle is in the world of retro and vintage computing. There is this thing. It's a thing. Vintage computing is a thing. Retro computing. So it's not only old computers, but new computers people make in the old style. And I have made a couple. And other people have made it. And I sort of wrote an essay just like smashing a computer somebody else had done, just saying, this is all wrong, it's badly done, it's terrible engineering, and then going to and elaborating on why. And then afterwards I thought, why did I do that? This is supposed to be a totally friendly environment. Nobody's here to become rich. It's about nostalgia, and it's about education, because old computers are simpler than today's. Why did I do that? And I realized I needed to give expression to that side of me. And this year, I am being too polite because of the I Ching. I wrote an essay criticizing Sabine Hossenfelder's superdeterminism theory a couple of days ago, which was the first of the year in which I sort of, okay, I'm going to stick my head out a little bit and I'm going to be critical because I can't resist not doing this. I was expecting to debate her. She didn't want to, so I will write it down. But even then, I tried to be polite, make the points I wanted to make, but try to be polite. But I am from a world in which if you try to be polite towards the other guy, that's disrespectful. You are patronizing the other guy. You are thinking that he's made of porcelain, or that he's made of sugar, so he will melt if he's exposed to rain, or something like this. It's disrespectful to do that. And now I am full-time for 1.5 years in a world in which the opposite is disrespectful. So I understand it. I'm an adult. I understand different environments, different value systems. But it is always, a constant reminder, I have to adapt. I have to adapt, not this environment. It's me who has to adapt. The fact that I come from another environment is my problem. It's not theirs. It's their value systems, their codes. That's how I have to act. I'm doing my best, Jeff. I'm doing my best.
The world of business that you came from is really the dominant paradigm over the whole planet. It seems to me there's more activity in the world of business than in science or philosophy or even politics. In fact, business seems to drive all of those other realms. For better or worse. I mean, one could argue that business is one of the main reasons why the planet is in the trouble that it's in right now.
I cannot but acknowledge that there are businesses and businesses. I have been very lucky. And look, I have no reason to put my former employer on a pedestal right now. So whatever I say, I don't have other motivations to say this other than to think that it is true, what I'm about to say. There are nasty businesses which are all about making money. And that's the bottom line. It's about making money. Yeah, true enough, it is your fiduciary duty as a member of the board to make money, because that's what your shareholders, the owners of the company, expect from you. So you have to do that. But the difference is subtle. The difference is you have that fiduciary duty that you will fulfill anyway, but what is driving you from within? Is it that you want to get richer and richer, or is it that you want to make a difference in the world? And ASML, the most important unknown company in the world, without ASML, no Apple, no Samsung, no nothing. The culture in the company, it's almost a bit of a sort of hero complex. The culture of the companies, the world needs us to enable leading edge technology that will solve our problems. And it's business to business. ASML doesn't sell to consumers. One machine from ASML will cost you $150 million, 200, soon more. So it's more expensive than a large plane, each little machine that is sold. And what moves the psychology of the company is what one of our customers said once. He said, ASML is the only company in the world that can beat the laws of physics. That's what drives that company. I'm not going to say us because I'm not there anymore, but it's a company driven by overcoming technological barriers that before used to be considered just impossible to overcome, because that's how we change the world, because that's how we will enable the Samsungs, the Apples to produce technology that will solve our problems. We cannot solve our problems by getting rid of technology anymore. Without technology, there is no way we can comport 11 billion people in the world as we are going to have by 2050. So it has to be a forward escape. We have to escape through better technology, cleaner, more efficient, that allows us to survive with that kind of number. And that's what moves ASML. That's what moves the people individually. I know that's what moves Martin van den Brink. Yes, he's rich. Is it important to him that he's rich? I guarantee you it is not. That's not why he does what he does. That's not what anybody in the board of ASML, they are selected for that reason. It's not what anybody in the board of ASML does it for. It's almost a hero complex. It's almost, no, a messiah complex. It's almost that, almost pathological, but it's still healthy. So if you were to ask me, you know, is business in general a problem? Well, statistically it is, but there are businesses and businesses. I wish every business had the kind of drive or impetus and the reasons for that a company like ASML does. That's why it was so difficult for me to leave. It was very difficult. I still dream about ASML once a week at least.
Well, how interesting. I've had experiences in the business world myself, because not being able to follow a mainstream academic career after getting a doctoral degree in parapsychology, I've had to be entrepreneurial. And my wife, Janelle, has had a very successful business career. It certainly helped me through times when I wasn't doing so well. She works as a corporate trainer. Her career is about training people in businesses to engage in customer service, time management, stress management, creativity, communication, what they call the soft side of business, all human skills, human potential skills the whole time. And she has felt most of the time working in many, many different companies, many large companies all over the world, that by and large, the people she encounters, with some exceptions, want to do better. They want to find meaning in their lives through their work.
And you said you were also in the corporate world. Can you say a little bit more about that? I didn't know that.
Yes, I have had a real estate license along the way. I've bought and sold real estate. I had a certification as a commodity trading advisor at one time. I ran a business in the criminology field, developing a fingerprint detection system using cyanoacrylate, which is super glue, which binds to the proteins of fingerprints so that creates almost a hard plastic out of fingerprints and is valuable in crime scene investigations. I've helped my wife in her business career extensively. So as a result of engaging in business, I've had the benefit of being able to travel all over the world. But mostly for me, to be honest, it was like the school of hard knocks. I learned a lot of things that I would never have learned if I had maintained an academic career my whole life. And for the most part, there were some big successes, but there were also, many failures. That's how you learn in business often, is through failures. So I'm very happy now to be able to devote practically all of my time to doing what we've been doing for the last 3 hours, just talking to each other and sharing the conversation with a wider audience. I feel like this is where I'm grounded.
Business gets a lot of bad press, and most of it justifiable, because we live in a system in which the thinking is a company that doesn't grow is a dead company. It's all about growth. You have to grow. The problem is the planet's not growing. It's still a closed system. It's a little ball. So you cannot grow infinitely in that ball. And business are still working according to that paradigm. So that's unsustainable. Now, having said that, some businesses, and maybe I was privileged to have worked for 15 years in the only one in the world that operates like this, but some businesses really try to make a positive difference. That's what it's all about for the people in some of those, or at least one, in at least one of them. That's what it's all about. And what is fascinating is that we hammer the ego a lot, right? And the ego is, in general, a negative force in the world. But there is a subtle alchemy that can sometimes happen, in which you bring out the ego in all its fascist glory, and you mobilize it for the good. That can happen. And I don't know whether it's extremely rare and extremely difficult or not. I have seen it happen. How you can feed the beast and still keep the beast motivated in a line that is for the good. If we could have every business operate like that, I mean, for ASML, it's easy because by doing this, they make rivers of money for their shareholders. So there is no conflict with fiduciary duty. The more they engage in that messiah complex and feed their egos that way, the more money they will make for the shareholders, and the better they will be for the world. So maybe it's a particular alignment of the stars that allow for this to happen. But at least it gave me a taste for how it can be made to work, how a corporate culture can evolve autonomously and spontaneously in the course of 40 years. ASML was founded in 1984. How that, almost 40 years now.
Yeah, no, 38 years.
How that can be done, how it can happen. So I know it is possible. It is possible to happen. Now, it's not easy to replicate. The Japanese have been trying to replicate ASML for decades now, and so far it didn't work. Books have been written about what has ASML done. How did that happen? How can we replicate that? And it appears that it is not easy at all. It's not even easy for ASML to replicate itself in a different business. Even that is, so it appears to have been a very particular set of factors. You have to be when ASML started in '84. It was, the beginning of the computer revolution. So the mentality was, we are all going to change the world. We are creating the future here. And it was a very palpable, substantiated feeling. It was not pure fantasy. The stuff was happening around you. And that seems to have crystallized, in the case of ASML, into a company in which the egos are actually contributing for the broader good. And where people themselves, they want to be rewarded financially to a fair degree, but that's not what is making them wake up in the morning and go to work. That's not it.
I think there's a larger sense in which the business community, which is so dominant on this planet, may be what stands between us and the Third World War. I know there are people who, I had a big conflict with one of my favorite former guests on this program, Jason Giorgiani, who was arguing, we got to go to war against China. We must destroy them because if we don't do it now, they'll come back and destroy us in a few decades.
That fear mentality is the disaster. Yeah.
But my response was, think about the ties that bind us through commerce. And people engaged in commerce have to learn to trust each other. Commerce is based on trust, ultimately. You can sign contracts and so on, but if you can't deliver what you promise, people will find out eventually. So it seems to me that people talk about a new world order, and many people are afraid of a new world order. But to the extent there exists such a thing already, it's because of global commerce.
I think you are onto something. If I think back to my own experience, I've been to China many times, and Japan and Taiwan many, many times. I don't know how many times I've been there in the course of the years. But for me, it is impossible to demonize the Chinese, because I have a few Chinese friends. I've known many. They are decent people, intelligent, smart people. They're not evil, at least none of the ones I met. is evil. They want a better life for themselves, yes. They are largely succeeding. There's a lot less poverty in China than there used to be in the 90s, let alone in the 60s. It's impossible for me to generalize the Chinese as enemies. It's like I don't live in that world. I don't live in the world in which this is possible. And I suspect that the people who can get there in that mental space, that if your eyes are a little bit pulled, you are the enemy. They cannot have met Asians in their lives. They cannot have traveled much. That's the only way I can make sense of it. You cannot know what Chinese are. You have to believe they are not people. But if you met them, they are just like you and me.
Well, and I suspect my friend Jason, who's still, I think, calling for war, all-out total war against China, probably has never been there.
And in Europe, it's been done with the Russians now. The Russians are demonized. It's like I was married to a Russian for over 15 years. I still have what I consider to be family in Russia, because although we are divorced, we are still good friends. And her family I consider to be still my family. And it's like, they're just like us. I mean, how can you try to hide a country's humanity behind a name? It doesn't compute for me. And I'm very worried about what's going on, not only between U.S. and China, but also between U.S. and Russia, which is here in my backyard. And on the one hand, I'm horrified by it. And on the other hand, I'm puzzled. It's like, how does this stuff happen? I mean, how can it be that you generalize? The generalization is impossible for me. Maybe I've traveled too much. I've met too many people. But it's impossible for me to generalize in terms of race, which I don't think even exists. I don't think humans have races. We do not have enough genetic variability to talk of races, or nationality or language. It's impossible to generalize like that. But it's happening all the time. So it's one of those things that I watch the news and I see this stuff happening, and I feel powerless. It's like, how on earth is this possible that this is happening? And I can't change it. I can't sort of transmit my perspective to the rest of the world so people understand that the Chinese and the Russians are exactly like us, and so are the Muslims. And so is everybody.
Well, you've been talking throughout our conversation about the Daimon. I hear from people who talk about the demons and who suggest that, our planet is infested with demons. And in every department of human activity, they are endeavoring to corrupt us. And I've done many interviews on this subject. One of them, in fact, I think was just released yesterday.
I usually follow it. I didn't catch that one.
Yeah, it's called The Mind Virus with Paul Levy, incidentally.
Paul, yeah, okay. I don't think Paul would generalize that to people, but there is something in the psyche of human beings that can translate itself into evil actions. Well, that's true, right? Evil is happening. So something in human psychology is doing that, and it may transmit itself like memes do. Memes are viruses in a way. They are not, literal viruses, but there is a spread pattern, a pattern of spread that is almost an epidemic of certain memes. And you can have memes that lead to evil actions. Surely, I mean, racist memes. That's what Nazi propaganda was all about. To spread racist memes, which penetrated deep into German society. So I would not disagree with that. I think we have to acknowledge that evil shit happens, but we have an adolescent relationship with evil. We think of evil as something that is there, not here, and therefore we have to extirpate it. The more you try to extirpate evil, it's like pruning a hedge. The bushier it will become, the faster it will grow. Nothing's better for a hedge to grow than to prune it regularly. And it grows very large roots invisibly under the floor that really pump it full of energy. It's the same thing with evil. The way to deal with evil is not to extirpate it, but to supervise it under adult supervision, so it doesn't become harmful. But that's a perspective I think we are very, very far away from. We live still in a culture in which it looks good if you say, I have no relationship with evil. I have no idea how evil people do what they do. That's far beyond me. You say that full of pride and righteousness, while in fact what you're saying is, I'm a kid, I'm a child, I didn't grow up, I didn't mature. That's what you're saying. That's subtitle, translation. I have no relationship with evil. Subtitles, I haven't grown up, I didn't mature. Because as you grow up, you start seeing the seeds of evil in yourself, the things that trigger you to do something that is destructive and not constructive. And all you have to do is to extrapolate that towards people who actually cause great evil. But you have to know it, to have some kind of personal relationship with it, a relationship under adult supervision, but some kind of relationship with it in order to stop it from dominating. You cannot stop something you're proud of not knowing. See, that, I don't know. I have stopped watching the news on TV a long time ago, Jeff, because it just depresses me beyond measure. And there's nothing I can do to change that. And that's not what my Daimon is trying to make me do. So why will I suffer? I just go into blissful ignorance sometimes.
Well, you're doing wonderful work as it is, but you've raised a very deep question about how does one supervise evil, especially as in the case of fascism, where evil becomes, the leader of a nation.
I don't think it's that difficult if you would just see it. I mean, how do you deal with evil? One, you have to become acquainted with it. You have to become acquainted with the subtle impetus towards evil that you yourself experience. Like you're in traffic, somebody cuts you off. Suddenly you want to throw a stone on the face of that guy. That's it. Now you're beginning to see the evil in you. Or you are jealous of someone. Somebody got promoted over you, and that's incredibly unfair. That's not righteousness you're experiencing. What you're experiencing is anger, which is the engine of evil. Or the most difficult kind of evil to understand, psychopathic evil, which is a total lack of empathy. I admit, as you grow older, it becomes more difficult to relate to lack of empathy because life tends to make you more empathic, through the knocks that you get. But I'm sure people can go back to a point in their lives where they were oblivious to somebody else's suffering, either because they didn't recognize that person as a person, dehumanized them in some way, or thought they deserved it. And then you insulate yourself from empathy. Go back there, nurture that. But what do we do instead? We are ashamed of it. We think it's morally bad to become acquainted with whatever vestiges of evil are in us. And I think precisely the opposite is what needs to be done. We need to go back, identify those points, and meditate on them, and evoke them again, bring them back, and not be ashamed of the evil that comes through spontaneously, like anger. Like you want something, come on, I'll stick my neck out. Every now and then, I want to smack someone in the face.
In fact, earlier you talked about how you thrive on a good debate.
Yeah, but okay, indeed. But smacking someone in the face.
a little more than a debate, but you do it figuratively sometimes, I think, in your the way you've described it in your writing.
Maybe, but it doesn't give the same kind of release that you have. When I was a kid, I used to do karate, and the kumite tournaments were a kind of release. You just you wash yourself out. It's cathartic. But I think the way to go about it is not to swallow your anger and tell yourself, I'm not that kind of person. That's silly, because at some point it will erupt, and or you will project it onto the Russians or the Chinese or the Muslims, which is happening all the time. The way to go about it is say, oh, there it is. There is evil in me. Okay, let's have a chat. Don't oppress it. Give it its time under the sun, but under adult supervision. It's like you do with a nasty child that runs around breaking everything. You don't go and smack the child. You just put a child in a space where nothing can actually be broken. You know, some beach sand on the floor, and and you let the child go berserk in there. That's how you deal with it. You create a safe space for that part of our humanity to also have its light under the sun. Evil is not something to be extirpated. It's something to be... I'm careful with the words because I want to use the word nurture, but it's the wrong word. Evil needs to have the right to express itself under controlled conditions, because it's archetypal, just like love. Evil is archetypal. Our choice is letting it run amok because it's not recognized, therefore it's not monitored, it's not managed. And when it runs amok, you go to war, or you take out a gun and you kill 12 people in a shopping mall for no reason. So it's not something to extirpate, it's something to become acquainted with, to give space to, but always under adult supervision. I mean, it's good to be an adult, right? It's good to be mature. It's good to have grown up. It's not good to stay a child forever and proclaim that with great pride. I have no relationship with evil. You're just a 5-year-old then, because evil is archetypal. It's in all of us. It's a neutral force. It's up to us to understand it, to allow it to be. It does have the right to exist. It just doesn't have the right to run amok and cause great damage and great harm. And it will not, because I think evil is satisfied with very little. If it's not allowed to build up, it is satisfied with very little. It can be satisfied, for instance, if it gets angry at someone in traffic, that evil can be satisfied with something as simple as printing somebody's portrait, sticking it to a sandbag, and punching away for half an hour. Something as little as that it's enough to satisfy the evil. So why don't we do that regularly instead of saying, no, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not going to punch a sandbag with somebody's picture in it. I'm not that kind of person. And you keep going saying that for 20 years and watch what will happen. Watch what will happen after that. It's okay to let it have existence so long as it's managed. If it's not contained and it doesn't become bottled up, it is not quite destructive. The worst evil is psychopathic evil because it's pathological. That one's tough. There's very little that can be done other than withdrawing someone's freedom, taking the freedom away from someone. But we have to do that not because it's righteous vengeance. We have to do it because it's pragmatic. It's what works for society to be able to thrive. There has to be trust and a sense of safety, otherwise we don't go forward. And unfortunately, if you're born like that, you cannot be trusted. So let's do the best possible to give you some quality of life, but we are not going to give you freedom. And in the Netherlands, we try to do that. We have a system in which after you serve your sentence for the crime, psychiatrists have to tell the government whether you're okay to go back to society or not. And often you are not. And you stay locked up in a clinic where you are given some quality of life. You have some rights, some freedoms. You're not treated like an animal, but you're not back in society.
Well, the real danger, I think, is when people like this attract a political following and positions of leadership and sometimes positions of political power.
But why does that happen? Think about the psychological dynamics there. You have been swallowing up your evil all your life. All your anger is bottled up. All of the destructive forces that move naturally within you because they are archetypal, they are Shiva, they are bottled up. And then some bozo goes up on a stage that gets on media, spitting out all kinds of things that resonate with the evil you have been repressing all of your life. That's cathartic. He's giving expression to what I don't allow in myself to be expressed for 40 years. What are you going to do? You're going to vote for the guy. Of course, that's what you're going to do with that. That's catharsis by proxy. You will feel vindicated. The evil in you will feel vindicated. And you'll still be able to go to church and say, there is no evil in me because I've done nothing wrong. Yeah, but the guy you voted for is going to war for no reason. That's what happens. We project not only the evil in us, but we project the catharsis of letting what's bottled up for so long, pop like champagne, fizzle out like champagne. And there is very little that will mobilize more political commitment than that catharsis by proxy. The guy is saying exactly what we think, what we want to do, but we were not ready to admit. Now they are ready to admit, because now they've been given permission to do that by that public figure. I'm not speaking about anyone in particular, I'm talking generally. So it's not only that it's important to have a relationship with your own evil, because then you don't let your own evil go rampant, but also because you will vote or support the people who do that, even if you don't do that yourself. Your life will be moved by a lot less fear, by a lot less anger, if you have a relationship with your own evil without shame, without being ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed that every now and then I get crossed in traffic and I go berserk. And if the guy stops and steps out of the car and I do the same, something's going to happen. I say that. I'm not ashamed of saying that. And I think I deal with it more or less okay. I don't go to the mirror and say, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. No, I don't do that. It's okay. There is that in me.
Well, there are political platforms in this country that are based on the idea that we're the good guys. We're the exceptional country. And anyone who says other than that is being unpatriotic.
That's probably, you can put me on the record on this idea, we are the good ones, is probably the most dangerous idea in the history of humanity. There is very little that is more dangerous, or nothing is more dangerous than this. When we say, we are the righteous, we are the good guys, and everybody else is the bad guy. And the evil is in there and not in us. That's when things go terribly, terribly wrong. That's when holocausts happen. That's when wars are waged. Social unrest is the generalization that is motivated by the thought, we are the good ones. No, we are not. If you are human, you are both good and something else as well.
Bernardo, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think it's time for me to go have some lunch.
I'm going to have some dinner.
And get ready for my next meeting. It's been a delight, and I would love to do it again down the road sometime.
Sure. I'm game.
Very good. So I'll say goodbye for now, but thank you so much. This has been a great pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity. Pleasure was mine.
For those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us.